We will come back into session. Councilmember Robertson will join us in a moment. Deputy Mayor Robinson is not with us tonight. She's off spending some time with her family. So we are going to be talking about the mid-biennial update, and I'm going to turn it over to the city manager to talk about the process, where we are. We've got about maybe a 30-minute presentation, I think, tonight.
Yes, in pieces, yes.
Okay. And then we will have any discussion that council needs.
So thank you, Mayor and council members. As you mentioned, this is, I believe, Tony's the fourth serving of the mid-biennium budget update to the council this evening. Tonight, staff are here to review with you, continue reviewing with some of the adjustments we've made in the budget, including an update on the transportation impact fee schedule this evening. What we are seeking is some direction to bring back the impact fee rate schedule at a future council meeting for adoption, as well as any changes the council may have or relative to some of the changes we have proposed as a staff to you. This evening, we have a number of people joining us this evening. First of all, it's Tony Collar, the Finance Department Director. Joining her will be Steve Milet, as you know, is our Chief of Police, Andrew Singalakis, our Transportation Director, and Eric Miller, who works for Andrew, the Capital Programming Manager. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn over to Tony to talk a little bit about the schedule and kind of where we're at and where we're going and what we need tonight. So,
certainly. Thank you, City Manager Miyake. Mayor, council members, as always, it's a pleasure to be back with you this evening. As City Manager Miyake mentioned, we've got a bit of musical chairs this evening, so as we move through our presentations, you'll see people come and go at the table as we move forward. As City Manager Miyake mentioned, we are seeking direction on the transportation impact fee schedule update. That will be the last piece of information we provide you this evening. And prior to that, we'll go through the other mid-biennium adjustments. This is, as a reminder, this is at the end of this evening's staff presentations, we will have presented the mid-biennium to you, excuse me, and we will be looking for final direction from you next week after the public hearing, as we head towards adoption on December 2. Our agenda this evening is to take a quick run through the calendar, reminder our major adjustments. When we talk about that, we'll also look at the direction you've given us so far. We'll do a police staffing update. We'll talk about the 1% property tax adjustment. We have some housekeeping items in the housing fund and the CIP, and then we'll move on to impact fee schedule adjustments. So we've been here a couple of times before, and the PowerPoint has left, but that's okay. I'm going to continue on. I'm on slide 3. We've been here before on October 28th. I presented to you the mid-biennium calendar. November 4th, Director Brennan was here. On November 12th, Chief Hagan and Fire Marshal Ken Carlson were here. We also reviewed the general fund forecast, and Kate Elu presented the Substitute House Bill 1406 implementation. Tonight, we'll do a little bit more detail on the mid-biennium adjustments, and then next week, again, we'll be looking for final direction from you after the public hearing, which is also scheduled for next week. We anticipate bringing back a series of ordinances to you on December 2. So moving on to slide number 4. I'm going to run through kind of the direction you've provided us thus far, and I'm sure the PowerPoint will be up and running in just a minute. There we go. I was just going to keep going and attempt to make her happen, and now she doesn't go forward, but that's okay. Well, if I was on slide 4, I would continue with slide 4. So I apologize. Slide 4, the mid-biennium overview. We've been here several times. We provided you a chart where we've kind of run through our major areas and then the time frame of when we've been there. Let's run through this chart and talk about the direction you've given us thus far. So development services fee, Director Brennan was here on November 4th. At that time, council did provide us with direction to come back on December 2nd with a fee update, and included in that fee update would be 6 authorized positions to assist development services in dealing with the current development pipeline. Substitute House Bill 1406 was brought forward on 12/11, or last week. At that time, you also gave direction for staff to bring forward the 2 pieces of legislation that are needed to adopt and secure that funding. That is actually on your consent calendar this evening, both the intent to authorize the sales tax, and the ordinance to collect the funding. Tonight, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping on the arch portion. Steve Milet is here to talk about the police staffing and the 2 FTEs. Andrew Singalakis will be here for transportation impact fees. We'll spend some time on the 1% property tax that was already included in the adopted budget for the 1920. And then we also did on November 12th, we went through a series of technical adjustments. I don't envision bringing those back. We're going to continue on. The clicker's not quite working yet, but we'll continue on with the manual slides. We'll bring back those technical adjustments. Included in those were several funds as well as adjustments to COLA that needed to occur. Moving on to slide number 5. Moving on to slide number 5, there's a series of actions that will be required to actually adopt the mid-biennium. And since we haven't had an opportunity to go through that list in a while, I'll run down through the list so that you're all prepared to understand what would happen on December 2. So on slide 5, it notes that we will be putting forth the 2020 Development Services Fee Ordinance as well as the 2020 Fire Inspection Fee Ordinance. You will also need to set the property tax levy ordinance. That will be the rate that will be charged in 2020. Once you set the property tax rate, we'll then make sure that we have secured the bank capacity. So we set the property tax rate and then we move forward to bank capacity. The last thing you will do is the last ordinance that will come forward to you on December 2 will be the mid-biennium umbrella ordinance, which has a whole host of things included in it. We also set the appropriation by all the funds. We'll have the pay plans for 2020. We'll have a list of donations that we have received that are under $90,000. And again, we will actually also include the CIP big sheets, which you will see all the projects on. You won't see that come forward until budget adoption. If by chance this evening you also direct us to bring back impact fees, that would also come back on December 2nd if that direction is provided tonight from this body to staff. All right? Before I move on, I think we'll just wait for a minute to get the PowerPoint fixed so that when Mr. Milet comes to the table, it's fixed. Do you have questions on where we've been or where we're headed?
Any questions?
All right, then let's just see if we can't get the PowerPoint fixed so that Mr. Milet can come to the table and talk about police staffing.
Okay.
Is that convenient for you,
Yeah, I think
sir?
that works fine if we can try to figure that one out.
All right.
So,
Come on up to the table,
Come on
sir,
up,
and
Chief.
we'll see if we can't get the PowerPoint fixed.
so what is, we're not running it from here tonight or running it through, huh? Oh, okay. So are we getting it?
I think it's in the process of working on it.
Do we want to just stand down for a minute? Or what do we want to do? Do we, I mean, I know we have the PowerPoint slides, so.
Are you okay going through without the PowerPoint slides working?
It's amazing how this chair makes you nervous.
Here you go, sir. I think you're up and running.
No, you're
Nope,
not.
not quite yet. Well, I thought we were close. If you're comfortable, sir, working from the PowerPoint slides, Steve is speaking from slide 6.
Here we go.
Go ahead.
No? Psych.
Here you go.
Okay.
There you go, sir.
All right,
Good evening,
Chief.
Mayor, Council,
Good
Mr. Miyake. Shortly after I was hired, the city manager and I discussed the staffing levels in the police department, as he wanted to ensure the department was adequately staffed to meet the current and future demands facing the city. During these discussions, Mr. Miyake expressed a sincere concern for the employees of the Bellevue Police Department and the citizens of Bellevue. He wanted to ensure the department was adequately staffed to effectively and safely serve and protect the public. We discussed the future growth of the city to include the development of the downtown corridor, Spring District, light rail, and the potential for the construction of a permanent homeless shelter. After considering the various methods to determine the appropriate staffing levels for the BPD, I suggested to the city manager that we hire a consultant who specializes in staffing studies. So with his permission, Mr. Miyake authorized the City of Bellevue to retain the professional services of Ethical Solutions to conduct a resource allocation study for the Bellevue Police Department. The benefit of contracting with Ethical Solutions is that the resource allocation methodology is an industry best practice standard proven model. An additional benefit is that with contracting with this particular company, they leave their methodology behind, so we can repeat these studies as often as we want. On August 16th of 2019, Ethical Solutions CEO, Mr. Timothy Friesmeier, submitted a report outlining his findings of his examination of the Bellevue Police Department. The purpose of this evening's presentation is to share with you his staffing recommendations. As Mr. Friesmeier started to look at the police department, he looked at the following divisions or units. First, he looked at the patrol division, investigations, the personnel services unit, the property and evidence function, records, and he also looked at the impact of future growth on the police department. Again, light rail, Spring District, downtown corridor, and a potential men's shelter. To arrive at his staffing recommendations, Mr. Friesmeier used a variety of methods to evaluate data. When the city manager and I had the initial conversations, I made a commitment to him that before I brought any recommendations forward, it would be backed up by data. And in the patrol division, Mr. Friesmeier relied heavily on the computer-aided dispatch system data and officer leave times. In the remaining divisions, Mr. Friesmeier initiated an employee activity tracker, daily activity tracker, wherein employees track the various activities they perform throughout their duty day. Additionally, Mr. Friesmeier considered the benchmarking evaluative method when examining the staffing levels in the investigations division. Additional comprehensive information on the methods can be located in the study. I'd like to focus real quick on the patrol division. The patrol division is the easiest division to evaluate, and the reason is because everything a patrol officer does is captured in the CAD. So from the point when a dispatcher receives, a call taker receives a call, sends it over to the dispatcher, and they dispatch an officer, everything is timestamped from the time they get the call to the time they clear the call. Almost all of the proactive work that our officers do as well is captured in the CAD. So if I make a traffic stop, a self-initiated traffic stop, as soon as I notify the dispatcher that I'm on a traffic stop, it starts the clock, and when I clear it, it ends it. So going through that data gives us a really comprehensive look at what an officer is doing. So what Etico found that in order for patrol officers to truly engage in the activities of community policing, now community policing is a philosophy, but there are activities that officers engage in to further the philosophy of community policing. The officers need time to engage in the activity. So there are some places in our country where officers are call driven. 60 minutes out of an hour, they're going from call to call to call to call. So the ability to engage in quality time with residents or anybody in the public is very limited. So ideally what we look for is to have officers on 30 minutes out of an hour on reactive time and 30 minutes out of an hour on proactive time. It gives them the opportunity to engage the public in a manner that the public deserves. So we call that the 30-30 split. And so when we were looking at our patrol division, what Mr. Friesmeier found was that we were at that time a 33-minute out of the hour on reactive time, 27 minutes out of the hour on proactive time, which is very, very acceptable for Bellevue. We have since, as we have added bodies back to the police department, and we arrived at 0 vacancies, and thank you for all the support for getting us there. I imagine that 30-30 split is going to be achieved, and maybe even then some. So let me get into the recommendations that Mr. Friesmeier is making. Mr. Friesmeier specifically is recommending adding staff to the police department in 2 critical positions, but let me go through the entire positions that he's recommending. Mr. Friesmeier is recommending 6 positions in investigations, but he's splitting the positions up between 3 sworn and 3 civilian. He's also recommending 2 positions in the personnel services unit. He originally made a recommendation of 3, but we have already transferred 1 person in there while the study was underway, so we filled that position. He's recommending 1 position in the property and evidence unit. My recommendations to the city manager are these. There are critical needs in the property and evidence room as well as investigations, and we're requesting that these positions be filled immediately. The property and evidence function is almost at capacity, storage-wise. If we don't add people there, we're going to be forced to look for an outside storage facility, which is also going to create additional funding requests and other challenges. And then we're also asking for one position in investigations. We recently have seen a spike in the referrals for internet crimes against children to our investigations division. These are the most complicated, heart-wrenching investigations that our officers will investigate. And I am asking for an additional person so we can have additional bodies to investigate these crimes and not have one officer doing it. My executive leadership team and I will continue to evaluate the need for the additional recommended positions and work with the city manager and the leadership team to fill these positions as we need to. And with that, I will answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for the chief? Councilmember Robertson, Councilmember Neuenhuis, Councilmember Zahn.
Thanks. So I was trying to add up what you were suggesting. So the recommendation is the 9 positions, 3 of which are civilian. And you've already filled one of the 2 recommended in personal services unit.
So the recommendation was actually for 10.
Oh,
The
what am I
original was
missing here?
10, but I reduced one because we already filled that position.
Okay, so they originally was 3 positions in PSU?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
2 for backgrounders and 1 for a training position.
Okay, so, but you're recommending of these 10 positions, one of which has been filled, you're recommending that we fill 2 of the 9 remaining, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
With the 7 to come at some other time. Do you have a plan for phasing those additional hires in?
So
Or-
the challenge for us right now is Mr. Friesmeier recommended 3 of the positions in investigations be civilianized.
Right.
And we're exploring what that would look like. I also have to bargain those issues with the unions.
Okay.
And so we're going to look, as in the coming months, we're going to look at all of the details in the report and also consult with Mr. Friesmeier for some additional information. There's a lot of administrative work, not a lot, but there's enough for him to have made the recommendation that perhaps we could take some of the administrative work off of our detectives and place them with the civilian personnel. But again, we have to talk with the unions about that. And the idea is that taking those administrative duties will free the detectives up to focus more on the caseload and the investigation itself.
Okay, but you want to fill the 1 non-civilian right away for the cyber crimes against children. Will then these original or additional positions, which I guess leaves still 8, will these recommended positions then all be subject to the bargaining that's upcoming in the next couple years?
No, ma'am. So really, the only ones that are relevant to the, and pertinent to the bargaining are the civilian positions.
Okay.
So the ones that are coming open, you all authorized me to add 4 PSO positions to the patrol force.
Right.
So as we get those bodies in place, and if we start seeing a 20-minute reactive time and 40-minute patrol proactive time split, that will give us opportunity to maybe move some of the positions in patrol to these other positions, and we may not have to add staff.
Okay, because this staffing study was done before we fully hired up the patrol?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm just, when would we have an idea of that, about another calendar year?
My hope is that we'll have everything done before the next budget.
Okay, it would be good, just to put a plug in, when we get this information in the next budget, if there is a recommendation to add more positions in line with this recommendation, it'd be good to have a phasing plan in place if we can't afford to do them all at once.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that would be really helpful. The other question I guess I have is, you said that the analogy or the modeling stays with us so that we can rerun these. Is there a population threshold trigger that's going to trigger us to rerun it? What is, I mean, as far as how projected out is the
The
study?
split. How many minutes out?
It's all about the 30-30 rule?
It's all about the
Okay.
30-30.
Okay.
So in those departments that have a 60-minute reactive time period, there are some departments that I'm aware of that had a 48-hour queue before an officer actually got to your house to handle your burglary call. It's like 48 hours. So,
What's ours?
I'm sorry?
We don't have one, do we?
No. Ours is 33 minutes out of the hour. Our officers are on reactive time.
Right.
27. So we're in really good spot.
But if someone calls with a burglary, we go, right?
We go.
Yeah.
But the agencies I described, if they had a 45-minute reactive time and 15-minute proactive time, they'd be really happy with that. So
Right.
we're sitting really well right
Okay.
now, in my opinion.
Okay, great. My third, because I had three things. My third is just when we do the budget again, when we do the full budget next year, it would be good to have an understanding, because staffing often leads to additional capital facilities. So it'd be good to have a plan in place for what capital facilities we're going to need for police as our city grows, and to start thinking about that. So not for the mid-buy, but next time. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Mr. Neuenhaus.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief Millett, thanks for being here tonight. And first of all, congratulations, within 36 hours, solving the issue about the offer-up individual who was victimizing residents here in Bellevue that thought they were going to, purchase an iPad or a laptop, and they got something completely different. So great work. And I also want to just thank you for, and the city manager for doing this study, for looking at the data. Before coming before us today. I think that's really important to call that out, and the fact that we are, delving into those analytics. Getting to the property and evidence unit. So I had two comments on that. So one, just to dovetail on what Councilmember Robertson said, I think we should look at, because it sounds to me like you're going to run out of space in that property evidence room regardless. So I think looking, no? Is that not? Okay.
So there's property in there that we have orders from the court to be able to destroy. And we just don't have the bodies in there to
Okay.
move the property out.
Okay.
So adding this position, the hope is that that position is going to, not the hope, the position will focus in on getting property out
Okay.
of the evidence and freeing up space.
Okay, great. And then I was just curious, because we have such a great volunteer unit with the police department. They do so much and so much great work. And I was just wondering, are we able to, instead of hiring someone completely dedicated to the property evidence unit there, are we able to use a volunteer for that? Or is that a little bit above their skill set? We really need someone there 24/7.
So the greatest challenge, and again, the working with the unions, this is union work.
Yep.
And negotiating that.
Okay.
And they've been very reasonable with civilianizing positions thus far. We were able to civilianize 3, and but I think at this point, what the recommendation is, and my request to the city manager, is that we add 1 full-time. And it's also, when you get somebody in the property evidence room that is dedicated to that position, and they, repetition builds proficiency, that they get really good at it, and they understand, the routine and dealing with the courts and all the intricacies of it. Having a volunteer in there to fill this role, I think, would not be as beneficial as a full-time FTE.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. And then really appreciate you just mentioning the commitment to community policing as well. Don't think we hear enough about that, so appreciate you mentioning that. And I'm supportive of this additional staffing. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Zahn, Councilmember Lee, and then Councilmember Stokes, if you have something to weigh in on, that would be
Yeah,
great.
so I want to echo just how quickly we were able to solve the crime over the weekend. It seemed like by the time we read about something going on, our police had already solved the crime. And to me, that sets the tone for the fact that, our staff are really dedicated to making sure that we are keeping our community safe. And I really appreciate that. I also appreciate your approach, which is just because a staffing study said that we can get, or that it might indicate that we should get, 9, 10 more people, that you're giving that some really deliberative thought about whether we really do need those folks right away, or if there are other ways to still get to meet the needs of our community. So I really appreciate that. I think that as we head to the 2024 and and our revenues and expenses crossing, that approach of really being thoughtful will be really, really important. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I did have a couple of comments, and one is, while I appreciate the fact that we don't have any more vacancies and we're full, I recognize that there's always going to be this continual retirements and whatnot, and so we certainly don't want to sit back, because we will always want to be in a bit of a recruiting mode so that we can plan for the retirements without having the gap in service. You and I chatted a little bit about the motorcycle unit and how that unit was shrunk because they were needed in other places. So, and then how difficult it is to bring that unit back. What I think about is, as we continue to see the growth and traffic congestion, what are some things we can do to maybe have some satellite places where our police officers can be, so if something happens, they can be more reactive? I can only imagine them trying to hit the 30/30 or when it may be really hard to get across town during rush hour. So we might want to think about what are some additional facilities in some strategic places that we might want to be. And then I appreciate the civilinizing some of the positions. We did that earlier as well, right?
We did.
In the last
ma'am.
budget as well. And then I am completely on board about hiring someone to work on the internet crimes against children. I mean, it's bad no matter what age you are, but the fact that there are crimes against children is really just heartbreaking. So the sooner we can bring that investigator on so we can really work on that, the better. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Lee, followed by Mr. Stokes.
Thank you. Well, the city of Bellevue is the best, and our police department is the best of Bellevue. So,
Agree. Thank you
and
so
I
much.
appreciate you coming. You're already looking at how to improve, make the department even better to face all the challenges we're facing. Even though the police is the best we have, you still got room to improve. And I think you have very much impressed me. First day or at least it's close to it, when you first got employees, talking to Brad, already want to do studies and to make sure that we have something that we can get better. I remember, when I first became council members 20 odd years ago, we have a police chief. That's what, 3 or 4 police chiefs before you. Police Chief Smith. He's talking about community policing. And that makes a lot of sense. He said, well, at that time, you look down further, 20 years from now, we will have community policing. But 25 years later, we're still pretty much the same. However, you have kind of morph into it. It's not meaning that when you are doing something, doesn't mean that you completely change it. That means you get into the spirit how to make things work more relevant to the community today, because things change. So community policing is basically civilian into made more appropriate roles more effectively, more appropriately, making people who are fit or who are not fit doesn't mean that, who have the mode, the interest, and the character to do the best they do what the best they are. I think that's the way things are, making sure. So I commend you for making this happening. And but I do have a couple of questions, just to clarify for me. You're actually looking for 10 positions initially, 1 filled, and now you're looking for 9. So you're thinking about out of the 9, maybe you can make it 1 more civilian, right?
3.
3 more, but 3 is 3 of the 10.
3 of the 9. Yes, sir.
3 of the 9. Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
So, the question I have is that, is this recommendation made before you hire your staff, full staff? Because you were having lots of vacancies. And now, again, based on what you have done, all the good to you, you have filled these positions. So is that requirement a need that you did before you fill it? affected in any way? Is it changed somewhat?
So
You
the,
don't
the,
need to
fo-
feel
the
completely-
focus on patrol were the number of FTEs that we need in order to achieve that 30-30 split.
Okay.
And so as we have added staff back,
Right.
we have actually gotten closer and closer to the 30-30 split. We're not going to know the full impact of it until all of our newly hired officers are out of training off the FTO program. And then, as I mentioned to Councilmember Robertson, is the impact of the PSOs that you all authorized in the last budget. And so this was like in mid-flight
Yeah.
of our hiring push, and I think we'll see the end result. And that's one of the reasons I'm recommending to the city manager that we have 2 critical needs right now, and then we're going to evaluate things as we move forward.
Okay. So it depends on the result of what you are going through. You might change the request somewhat. You may
Yes,
not
sir.
need all 10.
Correct.
You might- okay. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Councilmember Stokes?
Yeah, I just want to give you really appreciation for not only what you've been talking about, but the way you presented. I mean, this was an excellent memo, right to the point, and I think it's very clear where you're going on this, and that always helps us. I mean, it's your job to figure out and to get recommendations, and you have professionals coming in and helping. And I think it all makes a lot of sense. And again, we all think that it's a great department, and you're doing a lot to increase that. And I think it's we got all the questions answered. It sounds like you're making, from our layman's standpoint, good choices in where you want to put people, and that's all based on what you know and what you're working on. And so I trust your guidance on that, and I think I'm ready to move forward with it. I think it's good.
Thank you, sir. We're blessed that we have the staff that we have in the police department. We truly are dedicated men and women.
Great. Well, I will say this, it also starts at the top, and have really appreciated working with you, Chief, over the last few years. I know you'll continue on with great leadership in the Bellevue Police Department. I can't say enough about how great our department is and the rapid response that we have to issues in this community. So very much appreciate that, and working with Brad to be able to make those things happen.
I forget that you're not going to be here much longer, and I want to thank you personally, sir, for all the support that you've given me
Thanks.
personally, and the entire council for the support that you've given the men and women of the police department and the entire city operation. It doesn't go unnoticed. Thank you very much.
Well, I find it interesting. I'm unfortunately a Twitteraholic, so I'm on it a lot. And whenever we have a new hire and the picture goes out, you are always seeing a couple of responses from city council members, at least liking it, if not saying welcome to the team, to the officer. And I hope that makes people in the department feel good about the fact that the elected leadership of the city supports them as well.
They truly they value it, and I'm not saying it because I'm sitting here. They truly do. They recognize the support that you all give, and it is greatly appreciated, as is the leadership of the city manager. It makes a huge difference, and I think that's one of the things that attracts people to work in the Bellevue Police Department, is the support that we get here that maybe some communities don't experience. So I'll leave it there.
I don't check.
Thank you.
I show
Thank
up
you.
in my action.
Okay.
You're the best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we do have quite a bit to go, because I think we do have the impact fees to go over, and that looks like a fairly significant discussion.
So I think I can hit these next couple of slides pretty quickly so we can move into impact fees. So included in the mid-biennium, Mayor and council members, is the property tax adjustment that was included in the adopted budget. So this is implementing your previous direction. And just so that everybody kind of has the data points, a 1% adjustment equals $8 for a medium price home, about $936,000. It generates a little less than $600,000, $450 of which goes to the general fund, and the remainder of $144, it looks like, goes to the CIP for the fire safety levy and the neighborhood connectivity and congestion levy. You can see on this chart that the actual property tax rate is estimated to go down. I will let you know that these are 2020 estimates from King County. We don't actually get final data until the middle part of February, but these are the numbers we have at the moment. And then just because I think it's important, because I do get this question when I'm out giving questions to Bellevue Essentials and other folks, so I think I should at least mention this to you, is that when you're raising and adjusting the property tax, you are only impacting the 11% of the City of Bellevue portion. So quite frequently when I'm out at folks, I will get questions like, well, if you're increasing it by 1%, is that the whole pie? No, the piece that the City of Bellevue can impact and that council can impact is that 11% piece. The rest of it, as you well know, the other 89% goes to a variety of places across the area. The last housekeeping item I have for you this evening before I turn it over to Director Singalakis and his team is the Housing Fund has a little bit of housekeeping work we need to take care of. We'll be increasing that appropriation for the ARCH portion of 2 FTEs that you heard about on October 21st. And then, of course, we'll also be increasing appropriation for substitute House Bill 1406. And if you have no questions, or if you have questions on this area, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, we can move on. And
let's keep
gentlemen,
moving and
come on up to the table. And I'll introduce in just a minute. We have a little bit of housekeeping adjustment still in the CIP that I need to bring to your attention. We actually have only 3 projects that are being adjusted wholly in the CIP. The rest of the projects have no changes, and all 3 of those projects are changing purely because we have received project-specific revenues for them. So in 2020, you will actually an appropriation adjustment for the Bell Red Parks and Streams. We did have a developer contribution of $252,000. Now, the other 2 projects that are being changed are actually in the outer years of the CIP, so they won't be part of your appropriation adjustment, but you will see them in the outer years of the CIP, which is a grant for 148th for pavement preservation from Southeast 37th to Southeast 8th. And then we'll also have the second phase of Mountain to Sound Greenway, which Mr. Kessick briefed you on back when he was here, I believe, on October 7th. And with that, I would like to turn the clicker over to Director Singalakis to take us through transportation impact fees.
Okay, thank you, Tony, Mr. Miyake, Mayor and Council. The issue of the impact fees came up when we were talking about the Transportation Facilities Plan back in June. And the issue is the Institute of Transportation Engineers manual with the trip generation rates has been changing. And in order to maintain a complete and whole CIP, the impact fee rates are going to have to be increased to keep the CIP whole, and that really is our objective in this. And I'm with Eric Miller. He's the implementation manager for the Transportation Department, who will walk through a presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mayor, Council. Before I start, I'd like to just recognize our Transportation Development Review Manager behind us over here, Molly Johnson. She's the chief mentioned data, and she's been very helpful with the data that comes out of the ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers Manual, which is really forms the basis for what we include in our transportation impact fee schedule. Jumping in, this graphic the council's seen many times. Really quickly, on the left-hand side, the boxes represent the transportation planning and capital funding process. On the top are the vision of our comprehensive plan down through project implementation on the bottom with the transportation facilities plan right in the middle. That's our 12-year revenue-constrained planning document and forms the basis for our transportation impact fee program. The capacity projects, roadway intersection capacity projects that have full implementation dollars designated in the TFP form our impact fee project list, so it's a subset of that plan. From that, we developed the fee schedule, which of course we'll talk a little bit more about. New development comes along, pays those fees, those dollars go back into the CIP, our capital investment program, and help fund those same capacity projects. Again, thank you to the council for adopting the 2019 to 2030 TFP back in July. There's a total of 42 projects in that plan. 15 of those are these transportation impact fee projects. We are also including 3 completed projects. I'll talk more about that as we go through this. Those are, which is allowed by state law and our city code. Total eligible impact fee project costs are, I've got 2 numbers up here, and we'll talk about this too, $320 million for those 18 projects, including the 3 completed ones. And state law and our code both require that we include debt service. And it's been relatively recently that the city has taken on some debt through limited term general obligation bonds, and more recently the TIFIA loan to help us implement these capacity projects at a higher, in a nearer term fashion. A few examples of the impact fee projects: the 2 zones of Spring Boulevard that are currently still under construction. 124th is just really getting underway with the middle segment and the crossing of the East Link line. There's 5 downtown intersection projects. The 3 completed projects I mentioned include the Northeast 4th extension and the 2 stages of 120th Avenue Northeast, really from Northeast 8th up through where the crossing of East Link occurs as well. Excuse me. A little bit of background. The last time we did this review of our impact fee program was after in 2015, after we adopted the previous 2016 to 2027 TFP. At that time, our maximum allowable impact fee rate was calculated at $7,992, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that's calculated. But at that time, council set the fee to be charged at $47.03, which just happened to be 58.8% of what it could have been, the $7,992. Council at that time also established an automatic annual 3% indexing to kind of provide predictability to the annual increases to the fee program. And I really want to emphasize this last bullet here, that the code allows the application of a new or lower trip generation rates if there's a reasonable basis for them. So any developer can come in if they've performed a study, for example, of a traffic study, that their mix of development would provide a lower trip generation than our adopted fee schedule, and that's something that the code requires that we review. And if there is that reasonable basis, we can provide that lower fee. Jumping forward to today, in 2019, we see a much higher maximum allowable impact fee rate. The bottom line there, over $17,000 per trip, and that's based on 4 key things. The new ITE trip generation rates are generally lower. I'll talk more about that. Increased project costs, inclusion of the debt service that I mentioned, and that being a code requirement, and of course the inclusion of those 3 recently completed projects. This table shows kind of a comparison. The formula for calculating that maximum allowable fee is simply you determine the allowable or eligible impact fee costs. We can only charge fees based on Bellevue's growth. Unfortunately, we can't charge the growth from Redmond or other cities that come through Bellevue. We can't put a toll booth up. I guess maybe we could on the city limit line, but
We could.
we could. So the percentages in the second line there show what in 2015 and 2019 were the city growth share. In 2019, just under 60%. And we take that percentage of the total dollars that we mentioned above and divide that by these new trip ends. And that's a product of our transportation modeling exercise and the inclusion of the trip generation rates. That's a large reason why you see such the drop from 17,606 in 2015 to 13,667 in 2019. And you simply do that division, and it gives you that maximum allowable rate. And that council can choose to charge any amount up to those rates. In Bellevue, we've never come close to charging what we've been eligible to charge. So our analysis of the whole impact fee program this time around, and definitely focusing on the new ITE trip generation manual that came out at the end of 2017. We're seeing on average of the growth that's projected in Bellevue, and that's primarily office is the number one component of that, but includes multifamily retail, light industrial, which actually is reducing in the plan period, lodging. We're seeing an average of 23% lower trip generation. Again, office being the kind of the heaviest weighted component of that. Of course, some are higher than lower, being an average. Some uses are higher or lower than that. That really comes to the gist of what our recommendation is related to the fee schedule. If there is no corresponding adjustment to that rate schedule, the revenue collected from new development will shrink as a proportion of gross share of costs. That has CIP implications. Applying that 23% reduction, we see that it would be about $1 million reduction per year, or $6 million projected over the last 6 years of our adopted CIP, which could require a CIP amendment to reduce the spending, cut projects, for example. The next few slides are some looks at various development types. Single family is not a big growth factor in Bellevue anymore. We see 10, 12 units a year of new construction. Of course, a replacement house does not have to pay a fee. It's really for a new construction. But single family provides a good kind of barometer for what an impact fee is in Bellevue versus other places. One single family unit translates to one trip, so they pay the base fee. So today, in 2019, Bellevue's fee is $5,139. It will inflate by $100 and change with the 3% in 2020. But we are proposing a $6,854. You see the next blue line, and still well under our maximum allowable number on the far right blue line. And just so you can see some of our east side, South King County neighbors that we're comparing ourselves to. Office space in Bellevue, this is an example of a 300,000 square foot office. We've got the downtown location of Bell Red, or TOD, Transit Oriented Development location, and the rest of the city. The gray bar on the left is really what our adopted fee schedule. Let me point out really quickly too that in the previous slide they were thousands. These are actually in thousands as well, but the first gray bar, for example, is 1,821,000. So, not to be deceived. So the gray bar again is our adopted fee schedule with no change. When we're already implementing or allowing development that comes in because of the documentation, the data that's out there, to use what's in the ITE manual. So you can see about a $400,000 drop in revenue from a 300,000 square foot development. Our proposal would raise the downtown example to close to what it is, not exactly. And again, the red bars throughout these next couple slides show what the maximum allowable fee would be. You see in the TOD or Bell Red example, you see that the new fee, the proposed fee, would result in something smaller than we're collecting today, but we think that's reasonable because the trip generation is going to be lower, and significantly lower than it's currently calculated out there with the coming of the light rail and the density that's going to be constructed in Bell Red. It is being constructed in Bell Red. Multifamily is the next example. Same concept here. These are in 217,000 is that first bar. We've made somewhat of a last minute change to include, you see, high-rise 10-plus stories or downtown TOD mid-rise in this lower trip generation rate. And this is the one area I would say out of our whole fee schedule where we're veering off a little bit from what the data shows, but it just makes common sense that if you can look across the street from City Hall and see a 10-plus story building and a 5-story building. are they going to have a different trip generation? They're the same equidistant from 2 light rail stations that are coming in our transit center. So we thought that was a reasonable change to make to allow the mid-rise to have that same lower trip generation rate. Mid-rise outside of a TOD area where again, we're kind of hitting close to the same mark of what the development would pay today with our proposed fee increase. We have conducted some stakeholder outreach. We've reached out, presented to the Chamber of Commerce Land Use Committee, leadership at the Bellevue Downtown Association. We've reached out to developers that are in the pipeline right now, haven't paid their fee yet, and kind of walk through what the proposal is. Master Builders Association are, of course, primarily focused on single-family development, but of course, this will affect those 10 or 12 new units. Across the board, they've been very pleased that we have conducted the outreach. I'd say generally they speak to understanding the what's and whys to what we're doing here. I think they've been, again, appreciative that we conducted the outreach and that understanding of what we're proposing is there. And really to wrap up, we're asking council to recommending to council that we do make this change in 2020 from with the 3% increase, what would be a $5,293 base fee per trip to $6,854, and that we maintain this 3% annual indexing adjustment.
Okay, so we have and this is the last of the major presentations, right? So we've got 25 minutes. That means 4 minutes per council member, since there are 6 of us here. I'm going to begin with Council Member Lee, in deference to him being transportation liaison. Then I'm going to go in reverse order of what we did on police. So that would be Council Member Stokes, Council Member Zahn, Council Member Neuenhuis, Council Member Robertson, and then myself.
Thank you. I hope to have the shortest comments. I have a question before I say anything else. On page 22, the impact fee determined as the impact fee eligible cost divided by new PM peak hour trip ends. Forgive me, I don't know what trip ends mean.
Well, every trip has 2 ends.
Yeah.
And so for these purposes, if we are counting the trip from a new office building in Bellevue, downtown, for example, that's 1 trip end. If that trip happens to go to a new multifamily dwelling in Bellred or also in Bellevue, we count that as 2 trip ends in Bellevue. If it goes outside of Bellevue, we're only counting the one that starts in Bellevue.
I see.
Does that make sense?
So it's just the numbers, either where it originates or where it ends, depends on where it does happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to know the location of the building.
Exactly.
Thanks. I really don't have much to say. As you can tell, there's a lot of numbers, and I'm sure they compile it. And then you have some, discretionary factors you factor into it, and you make the looking at the numbers looks reasonable compared to other cities and increases, and it's a pretty, well, I would say, reasonable judgment that you made. And I think that, to me, it's not a big major shift from what we have been. And I think given the public outreach you've made, we haven't heard anything from anybody, right? Really violently disagreeing one way or another.
Nothing violent yet, no.
Yeah. So I would say that I would have no more to add or subtract. I'd like to hear what other council members may have.
Yeah, I don't know that I said the word revenue neutral, but that was really our goal with this update, is to try to keep the revenue consistent and keep our CIP whole.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Stokes.
Yeah, I think it's we really appreciate the presentation, very thorough and logical too. It's always nice to have that aspect to it. And just listening to this, it's fascinating to try to, wrap your head around why, because you get a lot of the impressions for the general public that all this growth is causing more impact and more trips, and, there are more cars going places and more cars downtown and all. So how would you talk to somebody? Somebody came up and asked me about this. How would I explain to them why it seems counterintuitive that the trips are the rate is going down and the number of trips and all that? What makes that change?
Well, I think number one, it's the development of Bellevue, which is very well planned, that we have worked hard to increase the transit ridership. Of course, the more multifamily units you see in these dense urban environments like downtown Bellevue, and more so in Bel Red, more folks are going to use other modes besides hopping in their car. They're going to walk. They're going to ride their bike, and definitely the buses and the trains that are coming. That's really why you see the reduction in the trips. Of course, overall, there's still more and more trips being made, including by cars, and that's really all we can capture with this program is the vehicle trips in our current system at Bellevue.
And more people are walking or using bikes or other transportation. And we have, as more transportation options, and that has an impact on that. Right, okay. Makes sense. I just, when you first look at it, it seems counterproductive or counterintuitive in terms of all the cars flying around Bellevue. But, yeah, good. Thank you.
I have not seen flying cars.
Well, they're coming.
Councilmember Zahn.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of this work and being proactive. I think the fact that we have 3 projects where we've got some revenue coming in is good, because, anything we can do to keep our costs down is always positive. So what I see is that the ITS trip generation calculation has shifted, and that's what's caused us to redo our own calculations. Is that right?
That's the primary purpose, and costs are increasing as well, and the choice that the city has made to incur some debt to help us get these growth-related projects on the ground and to serve the growth that's coming.
Right.
All those factors together.
So I just want to confirm, so along with making the adjustments for the revenue coming in for the 3 projects and the ITS trip generation, the construction cost escalation, because this will be 2020 to 2025 with the 3% adjustment, is that right? What I mean is, once we set the rate, it is going to be here for the next X number of years with that step-rise adjustment, is that correct?
If council takes no further action, but council can always call it back to revisit
Okay.
the amount that we charge, yes.
Okay. And then when I look at the trip generation calculation and the rates, I like the fact that it's lower in the TOD and the downtown. One of the things I think we've nibbled around the edges is whether we would actually look at a development with no parking. And if there was, so if they were to do a study that shows that there would be minimal cars and parking, and what am I trying to say? Will we still be somewhat conservative in our calculation of the fee if the number of trips being generated continues to go down? Will our reimbursement and make whole will be challenged, is that right?
I would say it could be, yeah. That's something we need to stay on top of, as the development styles change. I mean, right now, I believe, and I'm not the code expert on the parking maximums and minimums, but, we still have a minimum, so they're going to provide some parking. But yeah, the lower that number gets, the better, I think, case somebody would have, and their proximity to the transit services and other mobility options.
Yeah, well, and I'm bringing it up because we're hoping to have more affordable housing units, and reducing the number of parking stalls will make the units more affordable, especially if it's right close to transit. So, okay. But what I hear you saying is there's always an opportunity for us to revisit this if a couple years from now, we find that we actually are making some changes on affordable housing and whatnot.
Yeah,
Okay.
we come back with this and do this review every kind of 2 to 4 years with the update of our transportation facilities plan. So we're always going to take a look at it, or when there's a new IT trip generation manual issued, we'll.
And how frequently does that happen?
5 years-ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think our horizon to really understand the growth in the next 5 years, we seem to be in a pretty big trajectory, so. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Newenhouse.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. And thank you even more for the great outreach you did with the Bellevue Chamber, the BDA, the business community, the developer community. So really appreciate you taking the time to do that. That's important, and it's great to see that being done. And thank you also for taking a very maybe measured approach to the increase as well. Certainly, as you've made the case here, it could have been more. So appreciate that. So I do think it's a reasonable adjustment, and I do think it furthers our goals in a number of different ways. One of them being the transit-oriented development and the workforce affordable housing, et cetera. Although one question, and this actually came in through an email from our former council member, who used to sit in this chair. Which was interesting, he said that he wasn't sure about the definition of TOD. It's not clear what makes something a TOD or not when it comes to impact fees. So could you further define that, when that kicks in and when it doesn't?
Yeah, that's an absolutely fair question. It's not a term that's defined in our impact fee program section of the code. Okay. But we thanks to the email too, getting that too, that we did look up and talk to the folks in our land use and community development departments and found a definition in the glossary of our comprehensive plan that speaks to TOD. And I'll just read it out loud.
Thank you.
Development that is within 1/2 mile from and oriented toward a transit station that provides frequent, reliable service. TOD optimizes transit use through a compact mix of housing, retail, office uses, and walkable, pedestrian-oriented character. So a 1/2 mile is what.
Within a 1/2 mile then?
And
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what's defined as frequent then?
Well, I think clearly the East Link service will be that frequent.
Sure.
I don't know that that's the definition we'd use, and that's probably something that we would evaluate if it's there's other areas besides today where light rail's going. Eastgate with the Eastgate Transit Center and Park and Ride there is a high transit area, both at the Park and Ride and out at the Flyer stop in the middle of I-90. But I think that would qualify too.
Bus rapid transit,
That's right, yeah.
It's coming,
Absolutely.
high capacity transit.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that, I appreciate that, and I'll echo what Councilmember Zahn said as well. I think maybe 2 to 4 years might be too late to look at this, maybe every 2 years might be more on point, given the level of growth and development and all the exciting things happening in the city of Bellevue. But again, thanks for the great presentation.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We got around very quickly. We have 13 minutes. No, we have 13 minutes left.
I haven't gone.
I know, you have.
okay.
I know, but I was just pointing out, you and me have 13 minutes.
Oh, okay.
You and I have 13 minutes left, so you get 4 and I get 9.
All righty. We'll see, Yeah, I agree with my colleagues about the outreach. I think that was really appropriate. One thing I didn't hear you say, maybe because there wasn't any, is did we have any opposition to this? We haven't gotten any emails in opposition
Not that's been
expressed to you guys.
expressed. I think there's mentioned some of the uses. Multifamily is going to be, especially in downtown and in the TOD areas, will be lower than the adopted rate.
Right.
Office in downtown kind of hits the mark right on. Other uses, lodging, retail, are slightly higher based on the national data in the ITE, and we know folks are developing hotels and retail. Retail isn't a big factor. Primarily where we see that is on the ground floor of office and multifamily buildings right now, and It's not a huge growth segment in Bellevue's projections.
Sure, I appreciate the revenue neutral approach to this. The issue about TOD makes me think maybe we need to put on the work plan to update the chapter to have a better definition of TOD within the impact fee chapter, because trying to pull a definition that might be a little incomplete about, frequent from the comp plan is a little circuitous. The other thing I'd really like to update in the transportation impact fee chapter, and this will probably come as news to my colleagues, Bellevue is, I think, the only city in the state of Washington that does this. And when you have an impact fee and the developer's building the transportation improvement, under state law, you're required to give them a credit for the impact fees that they owe. And all cities do that, that charge transportation impact fees. Bellevue, if they spend more than the impact fees, most cities, they spent more than the impact fees, they still get the credit of 100%. Bellevue writes them a check, okay? I don't think we should be doing that. I think we need to change that. We are an outlier, and it affects our revenue to build more projects. So if we're looking at the impact fee chapter to add this TOD definition, which I support, I think we should also look at this issue of writing checks to people for the impact fees, because that's taking impact fees paid by other people and giving them to the developers. So finally, I really would like to, from a big picture perspective, we need to, and I know we're working on it, look at our transportation system a lot more than just at the impact fees and the TFPs. I know that we have some concurrency issues percolating out in Northeast. I really hope that in the next 12 to 24 months that we will look at concurrency across the city, figure out what we need to do, where are we going to have concurrency issues, how do we fix them, and what's that going to cost? And I hope this happens and that we have that back to us before we're asked to adjust the impact fees again. Because we need to figure out a way to stay ahead of the transportation growth issues, make sure that we don't bust through concurrency, and that we figure out a way to fund it, because you can't fund 100% of that from impact fees. It's going to be a lot of different ideas on how to make sure that we meet the transportation needs of Bellevue in the next two decades and beyond. But I hope that we'll do that before we come back for impact fees. But otherwise, I'm supportive of moving this forward. Thanks.
Okay.
We might look into if there was a definition of frequent transit service in the transit plan, which I think did focus on 10-minute headways during the prime times. I think that could be an area where if we're going to be doing, we should do a TOD definition, and then maybe something that says, if you are considering, however it would be, but maybe either it's a full definition of it, or for the purpose of impact fees or transportation, it is 10-minute headways, a certain percentage of the time, and a certain number of trips. I mean, I would think that would be the way that we would want to get to those definitions. But I think the frequent service in the transit plan may be a good place to take a look. I just echo the comments of thank you very much for the outreach that has been done with this, answering questions of council members, including myself, who had a couple of questions on this, because math was involved. So I do appreciate that greatly. No other questions. What's the wrap-up, Tony?
So the wrap-up tonight is pretty simple. Is at this point, staff has presented to council the entirety of the mid-biennium. We'll be coming back next week for the public hearing, and following the public hearing, we'll be looking for direction to bring back a set of ordinances, about 7 or 8 of them, on December 2nd for final adoption.
Perfect. Thank you. Is there anything else to come before us in study session? If not, we'll be adjourned, and we will reconvene in the main council chamber at 8 o'clock. Thank you. I will call this meeting of the Bellevue City Council to order. This is the City Council's regular session for Monday, November 18th, 2019. Will the clerk, actually, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Robertson, would you lead us?
Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, 3 meetings to go, and I did it out of order. I'm sorry. Let's do the roll call.
Mayor Chelmanack,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Robinson, Councilmember Lee. Here. Councilmember Neuenhouse.
Here.
Councilmember Robertson,
Present.
Councilmember Stokes.
Here.
Councilmember Zahn.
Here.
Thank you. We're at approval of the agenda, and we will be removing from the agenda the planned absence of Councilmember Neuenhouse. He is going to be here with us next week. So with that amendment, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the agenda as amended. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. That brings us to communications written and oral. How many people do we have signed up to speak on communication tonight? And a reminder that this is not about the temporary encampment ordinance at this time. That public hearing comes a little later.
There are actually no speakers under oral comms. They're all public hearing.
Okay. Anyone who wishes to testify who did not have an opportunity to sign up? I am seeing none, so we will move on, and that will get us to the other business quicker. Coming up next is the report of the city manager. Ms. Behrens, do you want to lead that now that you are in control here at City Hall?
That's right. Thank you, Mayor Chelmanack, members of the council. We do have staff here for one manager's report item to provide the council with an update on the city's Bellevue Essentials program. Tonight with us, we have Julie Ellenhorn from our Community Relations Department, our Community Relations Coordinator, to introduce 2 of the 2019 Bellevue Essentials graduates who are joining us to share their experience from the class. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm pleased to be here tonight for the annual report on Bellevue Essentials. So on Wednesday evening this week, the 7th cohort of our Bellevue Essentials class will graduate. This is a diverse group of 36 emerging leaders who have devoted 30 hours over the last 9 weeks to learn about the structure and inner workings of our Bellevue City government. And they've gone through a combination of lectures and tours, hands-on activities, and received a taste of many topics in all areas of the city. Learned about history, they sat in your seats and played boards and commissioners and council members. They built a big public project out of Legos. Learned how our sewers were cleaned, they allocated funds for the budget, visited our parks, and explored the character of our neighborhoods. Very all-comprehensive, inclusive 9 weeks. And last week, our 5th cohort of employees completed their Bellevue Essentials program. We graduated 45 students, providing them with the vital skills and the connections, giving them a knowledge boost that allows them to better serve our residents and to work collaboratively among different departments. We have an alumni group that's now grown to 236 residents this Wednesday. They meet regularly throughout the year for educational and networking and community service opportunities. We also have 203 employees that have completed our parallel employee program. So as I reflect and think about how Bellevue Essentials has grown over the last 7 years and the impact our graduates are having at the city and in our community, I'm very proud of the investment that our city council has made to this program and grateful to all the leadership and the staff who invest their time every year in creating a meaningful learning experience for all of our class members, both residents and employees. Collectively, our class demographic is reflective of the incredible diversity of our city, and our graduates are bringing new and diverse voices to the table in all aspects of civic engagement here in Bellevue. It's no surprise that the cumulative impact of the Bellevue Essentials graduates becomes more profound each year. They're showing up at our city meetings, serving on city boards and commissions, and at nonprofits in our community. I'd like to share just a few snippets of what our graduates are saying about Bellevue Essentials. It's eye-opening, impressive. I have a new level of respect for the passionate city staff and leadership. I'm grateful to live in such a well-run city. I'm so proud to be a resident of Bellevue. I now appreciate the complexity in decision-making. I now know that I can have an impact. This class inspired me to love Bellevue and to devote myself to my community. It was a deeply impactful experience. As you can see, there are no better ambassadors for the Bellevue Essentials program than our graduates themselves. And in fact, quite a few of them are sitting behind me, and I'd just like them to stand up and be recognized for a moment. Oh, come on, Michelle, you get to stand up too. So they're all done with class. They didn't have to come tonight. But I'm thrilled to see them all here, and I would like to invite two members of our 2019 graduating class, Deborah Deutsch, who is a longtime Bellevue resident, and June Wu, who is a brand-new immigrant to Bellevue, being here only 16 months. And I'd like to invite the two of them to share a little bit of their personal reflections with you.
So good evening. I'd like to start by sharing a little bit about myself. I took my very first ever plane ride and arrived in Bellevue in 1981. And it was one of those beautiful, sunny, clear days. And as I flew in, the mountain was out, the lakes were beautiful, the trees were there. And 6 weeks later, I moved to Bellevue with 3 young children, knowing no one. I wanted my children to have beautiful lives, and Bellevue seemed to be the perfect place. Strong schools, beautiful parks, and great neighborhoods. Life moved on. My oldest entered kindergarten. My youngest was born at Overlake Hospital. We joined the local swim club, celebrated birthdays at Pizza and Pipes. I don't know if anybody remembers Pizzas and Pipes. And Kelsey Creek Farm. We stood many days under umbrellas at countless soccer games on the field. We listened to 13 years of consecutive years of middle school band concerts. And we watched 6 children graduate from high school. Professionally, for almost 20 years, I worked in a human services and recreation nonprofit serving Bellevue. And I've spent the last 10 years working in the Bellevue School District and retired this August. So one day, one of my friends came up to me and she said, I heard about this program and you should apply for it. It's Bellevue Essentials. And I said, okay, I'll think about it. And then I read it in the Bellevue Reporter. And I was like, okay, that's twice. And usually if you hear something 3 times, you should go for it. And so then it popped up on my Facebook page. So I applied. I thought there was a slim chance of being accepted. And when I got that envelope in the mail, I literally did a happy dance. My husband couldn't figure out what was going on. But after 38 years, as a young mother, as an empty nester, and now a retiree, I would get to really know more about my city. Bellevue Essentials has become a grand connection for me. I've met people whose lives have began throughout the world and the United States, whose paths I may never have crossed if it wasn't for Bellevue Essentials. We're all different ages, we're all different backgrounds, different languages, and we all have differing strengths. I learned that my 38 years in Bellevue provided me with the knowledge that was just on the surface. But now I began to understand the deep foundations that today's city was built. We were built with boldness, valuing beauty, and recognizing the strength and diversity our community brings. After 38 years, I still choose Bellevue. It was a wise choice. I now know that I will have 2 grand connections in my future, and I look forward to traveling one day on both of them, the physical one and my personal Grand Connection journey. Yes, I still choose Bellevue. Thank you for your work and the opportunity to be a part of Bellevue Essentials.
Thank you very much. Very well said.
Good evening, council members, supported staffs, my fellow classmates. It's my great honor to be here. After 9 weeks of starting in Bellevue Essential Program, we are proud to say that we have fulfilled our commitment. For class is information to acquire, but for me, a new immigrant, moved to Bellevue 16 months ago, means twice as much effort to absorb while struggling with language. After each class, I have to spend double the amount of time to review the class materials. Fortunately, I haven't got any concussion so far. But for a newcomer, this is a overwhelming challenge to how to build credit, how to learn about the city, how to become actively in this community, and how to find a job quickly and effectively. At the same time, language and culture barriers can aggregate this challenge. I'm the first generation of my family. Comparing to the first generation of Americans 100 years ago, who seeks to survive only, I count myself lucky enough to doing much more. Bellevue welcomed the word, our diversity is our strength. We embrace our future while respecting our past. With an adventurous spirit, new immigrants can survive and grow. Bellevue Essentials has impressed on me this spirit. I bring open mind and willingness to learn and participate. At home, I played game mastermind with my kids. If I lose, they'd love to say, "Hey, Dad, you are fixed-minded." I reflect on what they say and wondered what I should do. Keeping the open-minded attitude and step-by-step learning method, I get closer to my goal. Whether it is a person or a city, getting ahead is not easy. There are some obstacles on the way. For instance, in May this year, I failed to reach the summit of the mountain Denali in Alaska due to harsh weather. However, I don't give up. I will try it again because it is my interest and my goal. Something and same is on the way to go upward in Bellevue. For example, diversity can bring us more opportunity and advantage, but how to handle this complexity and diversity can be a big challenge. During the class, we are powered by passion, which comes through lecture, staff contribution, and last but not least, those awesome dinners. We have a bunch of resources in our learning style, include presentation, role play, game, exercise, and more. When visiting a utility department and safety department, we can feel the responsibility of the staffs and our parks tour, how passionate the rangers are. Bellevue Essentials is not to tell us how the government works, but to give us the fundamental of self-governance. More importantly, I personally have the opportunity to learn from our brilliant classmates. They are pros, lawyer, doctor, educator, engineer, and volunteer. I appreciate their open-minded sharing. Although it is the end of our essentials class, it's only a new start of our community engagement because now we have much more resources and fields to share. Like a seed, if you water it, nurture it consistently, it will flourish in time. Now, I have already registered as a trail steward in Bellevue. I like to devote my passion and contribution to our community. I believe Bellevue has huge venturous spirit in the future. I strongly believe this venturous spirit and the diversity can make our future better and brighter. I'm going to do my humble effort to strengthen it. Let me close by expressing my sincere gratitude to Julie, my peers, Bellevue Essentials, Bellevue City, lastly, my family. You all inspire me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah and June. I'd like to leave you with one last quote from Linda Hoffner, one of this year's graduates. People are our greatest asset, and from what I can see, Bellevue is rich with diversity, innovation, and kindness. Imagine the change we could create if more cities offered their citizens an opportunity to learn from each other's differences and invest in shared goals and interests. We need more of that. On that note, I do want to share with you that we have received requests from other cities in the region wanting to model after the Bellevue Essentials program. I've been pleased to share our best practices with Shoreline, Kent, Renton, Bremerton, and most recently Tacoma. I expect that we will see civic engagement strengthened all around the region. Thank you for your continued support of the Bellevue Essentials program, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Julie, and thank you to all of you for participating in Bellevue Essentials. I'm sorry I can't be at the graduation. My day job is taking me out of town this week after tonight, but I have always enjoyed taking part in Bellevue Essentials and also being at graduation, so I'm sorry I can't do that. So whether it's 38 years or 16 months, people choose Bellevue, and it is so great to see that. And I think from the standpoint of as someone who's run for city council 4 times, you are really the reason, and those stories are really the reason that the 7 of us do this. It's about working with you and working for you, and this program is so incredible at giving people a look under the hood at their city, and then they become so much smarter about it. So again, thank you very much and congratulations. And by the way, you never get out of being a Bellevue Essentials graduate. There's always work to be done. So thank you. Great. Thanks. Okay, we will move forward with the agenda. Let's see, we don't have the vote on the planned absence, which means we come to the consent calendar. I would ask for someone to move the consent calendar.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the consent calendar. Occasionally, I take a little time to say what's on this because it goes by so quickly. There are new traffic signals at 148 South, or traffic poles at 148 Southeast and Southeast 16th and Southeast 22nd, one at Richards Road and Southeast 26th. These are going to allow us to do the flashing yellow turn signals. There's $4 million that's added to the CIP for the purchase of property, in particular the Kelly property in the Bellred area. That helps us do a 300 stall park and ride in that particular area. We're accepting the federal CDBG funding tonight. There's lots of contracts in here for maintenance of the great facilities that we have throughout the city. And there's $1.4 million in here that's near and dear to my heart. It's for the Viewcrest Sanitary Sewer Retrenchment Project. That's my neighborhood. This is phase 3. If you're ever looking for something to name after me, that you could always name a sewer. Yeah. So anyway. So with that, all those in favor of the consent agenda say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. That brings us to our next item. And I believe that is going to be the public hearing that a number of people are here for tonight on the temporary encampment land use code amendment. We're going to start with a staff report on this.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. This is the public hearing for the proposed land use code amendment related to temporary encampments. This important step of the process provides the public a formal opportunity to share their thoughts with the City Council as the Council considers the final content for this code amendment. By way of background, after initiating this code amendment back in September and several study sessions, this was initiated in order to replace a consent decree that the City of Bellevue has been operating under for the past 13 years with respect to the regulation of temporary encampments, which is expected to expire in January of 2020. The proposed LUCA would eliminate the need to refer to both the land use code and the consent decree for future administration of temporary encampments. Following the public hearing, either tonight or at a future meeting, staff will be seeking council's direction on the content of the LUCA that will advance for final adoption. Tony Pratt, our senior land use planner from Development Services, and Cindy Lynn, assistant city attorney, are here to make a brief staff presentation prior to opening the public hearing.
Thank you, Kate. So tonight, Cindy Lynn and I are going to bring forth the temporary encampment land use code amendment. And tonight, what we're going to do is, where's the clicker? Oh. The agenda today is to go through the schedule. We will talk about the background and history, feedback and recommendation, and the public engagement plan and schedule that we've set for this proposal. So on September 9th, City Council gave authorization for the initiation of the temporary encampment LUCA on September 9th. Since that time, we have looked at we've had 3 study sessions from September through November. We have fulfilled the process requirements for an courtesy public hearing before the EBCC, which was held last Wednesday, November 13th. And then we also are fulfilling the process for requirement for a public hearing that is going to be held before City Council. We have a placeholder today for a study session scheduled for November 25th, and we have final action scheduled for the 9th and the EBCC adoption on January 7th. This all will occur before the expiration of the consent decree on January 27th, 2020. So
I'm going to give some background for the members of the audience regarding, for the purposes of this public hearing, regarding this Land Use Code Chapter 2030U, as well as the consent decree, which is set to expire in January 2020. In 2005, the City Council adopted Chapter 2030U of the Land Use Code, which regulates temporary encampments, the process for permitting temporary encampments within the City of Bellevue, and how the city would evaluate those applications. 2030U permits temporary encampments only as an accommodation for religious exercise. Later that year, in November of 2005, Temple B'nai Torah and its co-applicant, Share Wheel, which manages Tent City 4, applied for the first temporary encampment permit under 2030U. That permit was subsequently granted with certain conditions. And shortly after the permit was granted, the permit applicants filed a lawsuit against the city, claiming that the Land Use Code Chapter 2030U, as well as certain conditions of the permit, violated the federal and or state constitutions, as well as a federal statute governing land use regulation with respect to religious exercise. That's called RLUPA. That's the short name of the statute. This lawsuit was settled in January 2006 via a consent decree. That's a settlement agreement between the parties to the litigation that is monitored and approved by a federal court judge. The consent decree outlines how the parties agree the city will interpret and apply the terms of 2030U in the permitting process. As a result of the consent decree's entry in 2006 and subsequent extension, it's been extended 2 times since 2006. 2030U has never yet been applied as originally enacted by the City Council and is currently and has always been administered alongside the federal consent decree. That consent decree is now set to expire on January 27, 2020, which brings us to the current date and the proposed land use code amendments that we bring today. This is just a reminder for the public what the proposed LUCA today is not about. Chapter 2030U does not regulate unlawful camping on public property, such as in parks or public right-of-way. It does not regulate sleeping or parking overnight in vehicles. And likewise, it does not regulate temporary or permanent shelters for persons experiencing homelessness, so any sort of indoor shelter use. This is merely a temporary encampment regulation as an accommodation for religious exercise.
So to talk a little bit about the temporary encampment hosts from 2005 to 2016, I have looked and reviewed at every temporary encampment application since 2005. There have been 10 hostings thus far since this time frame. So starting to the east with Temple B'nai Torah, they have hosted 5 times. Out of those hostings, all of the hostings but the 4th went very well, except for the 4th one where there was an improper contact and change of leadership within the temple leadership. Moving then to the west with the Episcopal Church of the Resurrection. They hosted once, and it is the only church or hosting that took place within the EBCC. Then moving to the west to First United Methodist Church, they hosted twice. And the hostings there went fairly well because the church administration was very committed to listening to the neighbors, and they really went out of their way to try to accommodate the requests that were given to them. And so as an example, there was a request to increase the height of the screening fence from 6 feet to 8 feet, and then also there was a request that there will be a school brigade so that children can walk back and forth to school and make their bus stops. And then lastly, further to the north, St. Luke's Lutheran Church has hosted twice. Those hostings were also very well, and since 2012, St. Luke's Lutheran Church has left the temporary encampment hosting, and so they've moved to more permanent housing, and so they've created a relationship with Imagine Housing, and they just installed 63 units of affordable housing on their site. So when you look at this map, not everyone has chosen to do temporary encampment hostings. It's not for everyone. And so since 2016, we have not had any further hostings or requests since that time. So to talk about stakeholder feedback, to let you know before we move to this topic, that staff looked inward and we looked at our regulatory framework. We looked at the regulatory requirements of 2030U. We also looked at the provisions of the consent decree, and we also looked at the implementation experience that we've had over the 13-year period. Once we concluded that review and evaluated our standing, we turned outward and then started engaging with our original signatories and our neighborhood focus group. So what we heard from the original signatories to the consent decree is that tent cities are necessary and they have a right to exist, that the consent decree and 2030U are outdated, that the signatories wanted a simplification of the permitting process for religious institutions who have hosted previously, and that tent cities should be managed consistently throughout the region. Conversely, the neighborhood group feedback that we received, and the neighborhood group was composed of members who have lived around the 4 hosting sites that you saw previously, plus they attended public hearings since 2005. So that was the composition of the neighborhood focus group. So what we heard from them was that they wanted increased accountability for encampment hosts and operators. They sought alignments between the consent decree and 2030U. They wanted to incorporate best practices learned from previous hostings, and they sought a Bellevue-based solution for temporary encampments, and they wanted to create flexibility for hosts who are committed to working with the adjacent neighborhood.
So in light of this feedback, staff prepared a package of recommendations for council that includes 4 topic areas. The first topic area is the draft LUCA attached to this evening's agenda item incorporates the first topic area, which when we get back to the slide, you will see is the alignment of health and safety standards. Okay, we're having a technical difficulty. Yep. Okay. So, apologies for the technical difficulties. The proposed LUCA, which is attached to the materials today, includes all 4 of these topic areas. Topic 1 being the alignment of the health and safety standards in the consent decree. This is the baseline land use code amendment that was originally provided to council during the study sessions before council directed staff to move forward with a LUCA that included the subsequent 3 topic areas. Today's land use code amendment proposal includes amendments to the following 3 areas as well: neighborhood engagement, location frequency and duration, and permit process. This is a streamlined permitting process as suggested as a possible consideration during the encampment host feedback process. The recommendations provided today are based on stakeholder input and permitting experience, along with consideration of the trends and regional approaches and the current regulatory framework. The proposed recommendations should be taken together as a package as they are designed to incorporate these conditions without impacting religious exercise rights.
So the first topic that for consideration is the alignment of the health and safety standards to the consent decree. So we've had 13 years of experience of operating under the consent decree for the life and healthy standards that are embedded within the consent decree. They have proven successful in preventing disease and protecting public health, and they better reflect the realities of how TC4 operates in regards to showers, numbers of sinks, and toilets. So it's our recommendation for council consideration that we amend the health and safety standards to reflect operations under the consent decree. Moving to our next topic, which is neighborhood engagement, there are 2 subtopics under this item. The first is to remove the litter requirement from the land use code as it's written today. And the purpose for that is that this requirement was universally unpopular with the neighborhoods. They did not like to have the new individuals in their neighborhoods, and then also it created loitering as well. In regards to the second topic, there is a recommendation to establish an optional post-issuance informational meeting between the encampment host and neighborhood. And the reason that we are making this recommendation is that we heard from the neighborhood focus group that they would like to have a connection to the encampment host and operator once a temporary encampment permit has been issued, and it was difficult to maintain those lines of communications once the permit was issued. And it also there is also an opportunity for the director to make this a mandatory requirement as well, if necessary.
On the topic area of duration and frequency, we combined the amendments in these two areas to result in a recommendation of a duration of 120 days and a frequency including a one-year gap between temporary encampment deployments within the city of Bellevue. With respect to the duration in particular, today's regulatory framework allows for a duration of 90 days. The feedback received during the feedback gathering process suggested that temporary encampment hosts would prefer a longer duration due to the burdens of setup and removal of a temporary encampment. The longer duration allowed for less impact in that manner. At the same, and the recommended minimum by the temporary encampment host was a duration of 120 days. On the other hand, other stakeholders suggested that 120 days would be a long period of time, but would be the maximum number of days that they would consider for a host in good standing and who had worked with their neighbors. So although it was not a direct alignment, 120 days was a duration upon which all stakeholders could potentially get on the same page about. And for that reason, staff recommends the amendment to 120 days of duration. Similarly, that recommendation is aligned with trends in the regional standards and other temporary encampment legislation in neighboring jurisdictions. To balance that, the recommendation with regard for frequency is to consolidate the three frequency-related provisions in the current regulatory framework so that there is one 12-month gap between deployments citywide in this, between temporary encampments in the citywide. This is roughly aligned to the operation of temporary encampments and the frequency that exists under the consent decree. It's not a specific alignment because you'll see there are the three current requirements, but historically, for the last 13 plus years, there has been only one temporary encampment within the city each year. The framework has generally met the demand. As Tony mentioned before, there has not been a high demand for temporary encampment hostings so far. And so this regulatory framework has generally met that demand. And the predictable frequency and duration is of interest to the neighbors of the temporary encampments as well as to ensure consistency and that the city resources related to health and safety, such as public safety, permitting, and code enforcement are not overburdened by the temporary encampment deployments. And lastly, the final recommendation in the area of the streamlined permitting process is in the form of a 5-year extended temporary encampment permit that will be an option for temporary encampment hosts that have previously hosted before and it had a permit issued that was not subject to revocation. The application for the 5-year permit envisioned in the proposed LUCA is the same for the first year as it is under the existing framework, and that includes all of these requirements that you see here. In subsequent years, if the host that has a 5-year permit wishes to host another encampment on the same site without any change or only minor modification, that application for the subsequent year would only include these expedited, streamlined application materials. I do note that for council and for the public that the LUCA does include the provision in these subsequent years of a safety and security report and a requirement for periodic operation reports so that there is a mechanism for measuring continued success and compliance with the terms and conditions of approval as a balance to the flexibility provided by the streamlined process.
Moving to neighborhood engagement and schedule, the city staff has informed the community stakeholders of the potential changes that we are proposing tonight within Land Use Code 2030U. We have fulfilled the process for requirements for a courtesy public hearing before the EBCC and the public hearing scheduled tonight, this evening, before council. We also have enhancements that we have established beyond the process for requirements by establishing a web presence under hot topics. We've worked with the PIO to message the LUCA progression, and we've also created a LUCA mailbox for commenters. So this concludes our remarks, and we are available for any comments for the public hearing.
Questions for staff? Are there any? Okay, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. I have a question regarding what you said last about the streamlined permit process, subsequent year application requirements. You said most of the requirements for first year are already contained in LUCA, right? Like safety and so on.
It is the same application
Right.
process for the first year.
Right. Okay. So there's safeguard, that's governing those requirements. Oh, my question is, what can LUCA do if these requirements are not kept or met?
Right now, the Land Use Code 2030U contains revocation, and so that is an option that can be used if it's found that there is non-compliance with the conditions of approval that are issued with the year one application.
The general enforcement mechanisms that apply to the entire land use code also permit modification or in addition to revocation of a land use permit if the conditions of approval are not met.
Any other questions? I have a couple of quick ones. With this concept of the sort of the 5-year application or the 5-year approval, or streamlined approval, the only reason you would not qualify for that is if the permit were not revoked? I may have had too many negatives in there, sorry.
I believe there was one extra, and you are correct, I believe in what your intent was, that disqualification would mean a previously revoked temporary encampment permit.
So to disqualify from the sped up process, you would actually have had to have been have had the permit revoked, and essentially the encampment stopped from being in a location.
Correct. In the past, yes.
No, but in this proposal, if you hold if a church holds an encampment and their permit is not revoked, that automatically qualifies them for the process that speeds up over 5 years, which somehow I think would be with maybe 3 hostings of it.
Okay, I think I understand the potential concern, so let me clarify. Currently, any host may apply, regardless of their prior status, for a permit that is good for the duration of the permit, which is now 90 days. And so the new proposal would not change that, but it would allow a host who has previously had a temporary encampment permit that was not revoked for some reason to choose which path they want to go down. One would be the same process, which would only be good for one hosting. The other path would be a permit process that would allow for a 5-year duration, which would basically allow the host to host subsequent permitted encampments under a modified process. And so that is the difference between the framework that exists today and what is being proposed.
Okay, I do believe that I understand that. I'll have some comment on that after we're done with the public hearing. Yes, Ms. Zahn.
Yeah, so following that, I guess I'm also trying to understand, so there's only one of these allowed in the city at any one time. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if there was a host that applied for the subsequent year application, how will that work if someone else also had an interest?
So they would not be able to host during that time if the encampment host who received that approval went ahead before that we received that request. They would be able to. They would not be able to host during that calendar year.
Okay, so the subsequent year streamlining is still on a year-by-year basis.
Correct.
It's just that the application itself is not quite as lengthy.
Yes.
And the time to process is shorter.
Correct.
Okay. So they would still have to, each year, if they wanted to apply, they'd still have to fill out an application.
Yes, based on the preponderance of the materials that are shown on this slide here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry, yes, you've got it. Okay, I'm sorry, there was another question that I had meant to ask. Did I hear you correctly that Temple B'nai Torah is in the EBCC district?
It is outside of the EBCC.
It is outside.
They are east of 156. It is the Church of Resurrection that lies within that boundary.
Resurrection was inside. Okay,
Yes.
that's what I thought. I thought I had heard, I thought I heard that, and I didn't think that it was correct. So I do appreciate that. The other, with this permit application, there are at least at this moment 2 groups that manage temporary encampments, and there is the one that is under share, and there is one that is run, I forget the name of it now. Does it matter which one is running it to be able to get that quicker permit process? So if share did it one time and wasn't revoked, is it only a share permit that gets the fast, or would the other group, which is
Camp Unity.
Yeah, I'm sorry?
Camp Unity.
Yes, Camp Unity. Thank you very much. Would they be allowed to get the sped up process?
It depends on the encampment host and who they affiliate with. So as an example, Temple B'nai Torah has hosted Tent City 4 5 times, but First United Methodist Church has hosted both TC4, but the second time they hosted Camp Unity the second time. So it depends on the affiliation between the encampment host and then the operator and the ask.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I would entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to open the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The public hearing is open. How many people do we have signed up?
There are 12 people.
12 people. Okay, so when your name is called, and maybe we can call 3 names at once so that we know who all is in the queue, come to the front, state your name and your address. The light will come on, the green light will come on, that means you're on the clock. When the yellow light comes on, that means you have 1 minute left, and when the red light comes on, you're done. It is a 3-minute time period that you have to speak to the council on this issue, and I am going to ask the clerk to call the first 3 people.
The first 3 in order would be Kalameli Palo, Angela Janasic, and Greg Glockner.
Good evening, council members. My name is Kalameli Paulo, and I I live in Auburn, but I work in Bellevue for the Sophia Way. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. Well, I want to first thank you all for personally thank you all for your support with the Sophia Way. I have been serving the homeless population in the greater Seattle area for the past 3 years, and a year ago, I began working for the Sophia Way in Bellevue, here in Bellevue. As of August, I became the lead of the emergency shelter, women's shelter, which we are now located at the Temple Benai Torah, which is awesome. And yeah, I have seen firsthand the crucial role that congregations play by providing shelter to the women in my program. So as we discuss the need for tent encampments, I want you to remember the significant need that congregations feel for those experiencing homelessness. Let's start by talking about the cause of homelessness. Many think that the homelessness is due to addiction and mental health or problems related to crime. Let me dispel those myths for you right now. They are untrue. Homelessness is caused by a lack of low income housing, affordable housing, plain and simple. In Bellevue, the average median income is $100,000 a year. When someone's income is this high, the causes of homelessness seems abstract, but they are very real. Roughly a third of Bellevue residents are paid minimum wage, and that a proportion number of people experiencing homelessness are people of color. And 40% of our youth experiencing homelessness are in King County are LGBTQ community. Furthermore, there are no shelters in Bellevue that provide services for families, couples, and people with pets. So I urge you, the council, to consider the significance of these encampments by supporting congregations to provide encampments. We minimize the likelihood of children in Bellevue School District from sleeping in woods or the streets, or we can help families stay together. We know that pets are not turned away and see couples remain together. So I stand here as a working member of this community and ask, why limit encampments to locate on religious land? They fill a gap for those who do not have access to resources. Furthermore, why limit frequencies for encampments when there are faith-based organizations that are apt and willing to provide assistance? So let's not limit our ability to provide resources on these growing leisure issues.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. You did very well. Thank you.
Angela Jernasik.
Hello. My name is Angela Jernasik. I live at 15772 Northeast 4th Street, Bellevue, Washington, 98008, down the street from Temple Benai Torah. I'm going to read from a neighborhood flyer that was put out right before the 2014 Tent City 4 stay at Temple Benai Torah. Tent City 4 is self-policing, meaning that all TC4 residents themselves in rotation handle ID checks, screening, and the enforcement of the code of conduct that Temple Benai Torah, TBT, and assure us is rigorously enforced. No outside agency or authority verifies this. There is no outside security. The code of conduct states that no drugs or alcohol, and TC4 states they are 100% drug and alcohol free, yet in January 2014, at Mary Queen of Peace in Sammamish, there were 3 to 4 meth trafficking related police cases involving at least 2 arrests. One arrestee told police that he had sold meth to 12 TC4 residents that day. Those arrests were part of a joint ongoing investigation involving multiple reports. At least one meth case involved an individual related to a previously known case. The code of conduct states that no violence is tolerated, and TC4/Share claim no one has ever been harmed by their operations, yet there was a rape allegation during the recent Mary Queen of Peace Day, which went unreported for 2 months. There is a history of allegations of assaults, rapes, and sexual crimes against women going unreported due to a now changed rule, Share, preventing residents from calling 911 unless it was okayed by the camp hierarchy. People breaking that aforementioned rule were ejected and banned from the shelter while the accuser remained, which hardly seems fair. In the 2014 stay at TPT, there was a overdose death a drug OD resulting in death at the camp due to management and hosts were non-cooperative with authorities. One person on the share camp management team had a felony warrant out for her arrest that must have been missed during the outstanding warrant and sex offender checks. There were women selling their wares at the park behind my house, as well as on the property of the adjacent church. Reports of alcohol, guns, and drugs at the 14 sheriff's day at TBT. So I appreciate the city's desire and efforts to streamline what must be a repetitive and tedious process. However, passing this amendment ignores the neighbors' repeated concerns and feedback to the city and minimizes any chance for neighbors to hold the encampment's management and hosts accountable in any real way should unforeseen events occur and put what could be a potentially very good situation at risk. I'd like to submit these papers for the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. If you, hand that to the clerk.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Greg Glonkner. I'm a 12-year resident of Bellevue at 3640 163rd Avenue Southeast. Thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight. My family and I have, over the years, been volunteers at Tent City during its various encampments. It's been a very fulfilling opportunity for us. And in fact, my son, who is currently a junior at Sammamish High School, over the years has cooked, has worked, and has in fact befriended members of the community, watched one of them in particular through their friendship use this as an opportunity to work his way out of homelessness and into a normal life. It's fulfilling a very important role in our community, and I would appreciate that the council and the city of Bellevue do what it can to help enable this. I realize it is a burden for all involved, including the volunteers as well as for the city staff and the neighborhood, but anything that can minimize that effort and minimize the burdens would certainly be appreciated for those of us who volunteer and those residents of these encampments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
The next three in order are Karen Morris, Cliff Cantor, and Samuel Basta. Karen Morris.
Karen Morris, my address is on file. City staff has for years had documentation of problems during tent encampments at TBT and elsewhere. And I have re-provided some of that information today because they're claiming some stays were not problematic, which were very problematic. Neighbors have provided much of this and have tried to work with both the city and the hosts for years to resolve obvious issues with logical operational changes. We have proven that the existing management procedures and the self-management style do not result in permit conditions being adhered to or commitments made to stakeholders being kept. We have waited 13 years for a process to address these deficiencies. Mediation and facilitation failed. Up to this point, enforcement has been lacking and attempts to get major issues addressed by hosts have fallen on deaf ears. So it is profoundly disturbing that the city process has left the real input of its impacted citizens out and failed to even attempt to address our major concerns. There are none so blind as those who will not see. This process has been blind to one perspective and to the obvious logical gaps in the demands of the other. The neighborhood engagement was unfortunately tokenism with no substance. There are only two proposals for addressing our concerns. One is by far the least impactful of the 7 things that we have asked for. The other 6 are not even mentioned. The second offered proposal is voluntary, something we don't want because it has already been tried and proven to be not only ineffective but dismissive. The comparative chart is cherry-picked, only trying to support what others want. I provided info to demonstrate that the proposals are not clear regional standards and that there are good ideas from other cities that could have been considered in this process but were not. My sad conclusion is that there was never any real intention to address anything but the signatories' issues in this truncated process, and I know why. Far from being cooperative participants in a collaborative process for achieving a balance that addresses everyone's concerns, signatories have expected their concerns to be addressed without any serious attention paid to neighbors' legitimate public health and safety concerns. They get their way by threatening to sue the city anytime neighbors or staff suggest things to achieve that balance, and the city backs down. I observed this directly in a meeting I attended before the 2016 TBT stay, where I, as the neighborhood representative, was not even allowed to speak. Anyone who thinks that this kind of one-sided approach will result in Bellevue avoiding the problems we see in Seattle and elsewhere is fooling themselves. These same techniques are a large part of what got those places where they are, and the same methods will not get different results here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morris.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Cliff Cantor. I'm speaking for Temple B'nai Torah as a member. The temple is in East Bellevue. Our rabbi, Sidney Danziger, took sick and couldn't be here tonight. I'm not a rabbi, but I'll do my best. First, we thank this council and the city as a whole for its great work on the new men's shelter. The city, the council has taken a leadership role in the community and among neighboring cities by really grappling with a problem that is not easy. It's the opposite of easy. I'd also like to commend the staff on 15 years of attention to this temporary encampment ordinance and now amending it. The temple has a history of sheltering homeless people. You just heard from Sophia's Way that we have been using the temple building as an indoor night-only shelter for women right now. We have long thought that a religious organization should be free to shelter homeless people on its property and just as free of regulation as possible. It's not desirable in any community that people can say, well, I can pray here, I can hire employees here, I can buy my supplies here, pay for gas here, but I can't actually practice my religion here. That's not permissible. And Bellevue, to its credit, has not been doing that. I do want to raise a couple of issues with respect to the draft LUCA. First, the minimum 12-month gap between temporary encampments. This is in section 20.30U.125, subparagraph A, subparagraph 5. It says, quote, there shall be a minimum 12-month gap between any temporary encampments in the city, end quote. What that does, inadvertently, is create a situation where one's religious freedom depends on someone else's religious freedom. It means that if I'm X and I want to do something in the practice of my religion, I first have to find out what Y did and what Z did in the practice of their religions. And if Y and Z did something to further their religious beliefs, that could result in me as X not being able to further my religious beliefs. This, I'm very familiar with precedents in the field of homeless encampments, but I'm not familiar with any precedent that supports this type of regulation of any spacing. There really isn't a need for spacing. As you've heard, the encampments have been relatively few and far between. On average, Bellevue does not host any religious encampments, on average. Once in a while, we as a city do host, but they're not that often. There really isn't a problem that needs to be solved by having this spacing. It's a little bit like if some city somewhere were to pass...
We're at the 3-minute mark, Mr. Cantor.
Thank you,
I
Ron.
apologize. Okay, thank you. Yes. Deacon, before you move forward, if you want to submit your testimony for the record, you can do that with the clerk or just email it to us, the finish of it. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Sam Bosta. I'm a resident here in Bellevue, 16721 Southeast 28th Street. I wanted to just offer a little bit of background as a native of Bellevue, born here, went to school here. I operated a business here for over 30 years. I own business property over by Richards Road, and I love my city. I'd like to just say that in my experience with council members and my dealings with the city, I've always found them, even though frustrated sometimes, to be fair and very community-minded, and I have the deep belief that one does not serve on a council and do what you do without a good sense of civic duty. I have been volunteering for many years, serving the homeless, mostly in Seattle, but some in Bellevue, with people living on the streets. Did a lot of work in the tent encampments or underneath the freeway, which was once called the jungle. And as that moved out into the city, and it is a horrific problem. There are people living in our woods in Bellevue, which is very troubling for me. And Bellevue is very interesting in that we are a very compassionate community. The people of faith, the faith communities on Bellevue carry a great deal of water for the homeless community. It is where you will find low-income housing that's been built. It's where you'll find shelters. It's where you'll find places where people are fed. My own faith community of Sacred Heart, which I'm a full-time deacon and in charge of that community for the last 18 months or so. I'm always amazed at how much it reaches out, even though it doesn't have an encampment or anything, how many different places it ends up feeding inside the city of Bellevue. It is so vitally important, and I think the temple and their work and spoke so eloquently on the need to preserve the rights of the religious community, the rights as religious property owners, the right to exercise our faith. It is this place of hope, this place where we walk with and give people human dignity, that the problem can be worked towards solving. It's a massive problem. It's not just Seattle. It's not just Tacoma. It is literally all over the country in the major cities, and it will continue to come to Bellevue in a stronger and stronger way. It is the faith communities that give us the best hope. Once a year is really just a cursory view. Please be gentle with our faith communities and give them their constitutional right to practice their faith.
Thank you. Thank you.
The next three in order are Colleen Lang, Karen Stetters, and Michael Ramos.
Thank you, council members. My name is Colleen Lang, and I live at 15826 Southeast 4th Street in Lake Hills. I'm a actual Bellevue native, grew up in Somerset, and I've been a Lake Hills resident for about 10 and a half years. I own a home there, and I can tell you that as a person who works for a nonprofit, United Way of King County, and is a homeowner, it's an expensive place to live, and I know we all know that, and we all feel it from time to time. I'm here tonight with my resident hat on, not my United Way hat, but I have learned a little bit from United Way about ending homelessness, and in that capacity I attend the Eastside Human Services Forum and am familiar with the landscape locally. Of course, as an individual, I'm a member of the Eastside Interfaith Gathering, which is made up of members from Eastside congregations. The 2019 Count Us In survey found 337 unsheltered people on the east side. So these are people who have no shelter, no home. They're not couch surfing, they're outdoors. They are living in places unfit for human habitation. Bellevue Schools found 300 homeless students this year. Those are could be families that are couch surfing and sharing homes, or are sheltered or unsheltered. So we know we have a problem. We know that some of our neighbors are homeless. And as our friend from Sophia Way said, about a third of Bellevue residents are making minimum wage. Minimum wage is under $30,000 a year. That's, depending on how many kids you have, close to the poverty level. And because we know that we have low-income residents and homeless residents, I think we've got an issue with the city not offering any permanent shelter and not offering any permanent encampments. The reason encampments are valuable is because we don't have low barrier shelters. People are attached to three things: the other people in their life, their pets, and their property. When you go into a shelter, if you're a woman and you have a partner, you can't bring your man into your women's shelter and vice versa. Some shelters don't allow children. Some allow children, but not teenage boys. So it's hard to keep a family intact. If you have lost all of your belongings in your home, but you have a dog, you don't want to give up that pet. So there are a lot of reasons, legitimate decision-making that goes on in people's minds why they end up in encampments. And since we know that people have a need for this, I think we have a real issue with saying that it can only occur for a few months every year or 18 months. We need permanent places for people to be sheltered. One of the important reasons for that is that people have jobs, they have, I'll wind up real quickly, they have social connections to their neighborhood, and they need reliable transportation. And when we move them around from Kirkland to Bellevue, et cetera, we're disrupting people whose lives are very fragile.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mayor Chalmanack and Bellevue City Council members. My name is Karen Studders. I am a renter, not a homeowner. I was a resident of Bellevue. I am not now, but I am the faith representative on the East Side Human Services Forum Work Group and their legislative committee, and I serve as the interfaith coordinator under contract with the Church Council of Greater Seattle. I want to say that the number of men, women, and children that are seeking refuge far exceeds the number of safe, supportive spaces for them to stay in the city of Bellevue. Emergency shelters are not open throughout the year and have limited hours, and they must move to a new location every few months. The toll on human suffering is huge in the city of Bellevue. In the Luca record, the city's summary of the history of tent encampments is not neutral. It leaves out significant legal challenges since the execution of the consent decree. Specifically, a case directly on point in the state of Washington, where in 2009, a congregation sued the city of Bellevue. In that case, the Washington Supreme Court held that the Washington and federal Constitution and the Arlupia that your city attorney referred to earlier both required that city zoning restrictions must be narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling government interest and allow religious organizations to exercise their rights. That was our Supreme Court, and it does not appear to be mentioned in the city's documents. Most recently, in Boise, Idaho, 7 citizens that are experiencing homelessness sued the city of Boise, and the U.S. Court of Appeals held that cities cannot prosecute people for sleeping on the streets if a city does not have enough shelter beds available within its jurisdiction. In 2016, at the request of the city of Bellevue, Kirkland, Redmond, and Issaquah, the Church Council convened a group of congregations and identified 12 recommendations for the cities to look at. You've received that memo, and I know it was recently resubmitted in this record. But none of your proposals tonight consider any of those 12 recommendations. Instead, incorporating those recommendations, the city has passed 3 restrictive ordinances and is continuing to marginalize people experiencing homelessness within Bellevue. And for some odd reason is not figuring out that this is a regional problem and we have to figure out how to work together as municipalities. And the 3 ordinances I refer to is the city's ban on parking for more than 24 hours, the city's ban on sleeping in city streets, and the delay that is occurring with the men's shelter. I know you did awesome work, but we're looking at years out before this shelter is available. Finally, I want to say that you did an awesome job on Highland Village.
Thank you.
I know you. We can do this. Please work with the faith community.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Michael Ramos. I serve as Executive Director of the Church Council of Greater Seattle. The Church Council includes among its members congregations from 16 denominations on the east side and city of Bellevue. Our recent efforts in the city of Bellevue have been interfaith through the East Side Interfaith Gathering, including Catholic, Muslim, and Jewish congregations as well. These congregations have formed the heart of the city's response to homelessness for 4 decades. One way through which our service and ministry are expressed is by hosting people experiencing homelessness on their property as an exercise of our religious faith and responsibility. We're concerned about the city of Bellevue limiting the ability of congregations to host temporary tent encampments and work with providers in the offering of safe encampments and the transition to more permanent housing. We call on the city leadership to slow down, listen to the experience and wisdom of our local faith leaders before considering moving forward with a land use code and ordinance, and recognize that more conversation is needed in order to avoid adversely impacting the right to religious exercise. Specifically, more time is necessary to ensure that the city does not pose an undue burden on religious institutions. Indeed, we ask that you extend the period of public comment. In ruling in favor of North Shore United Church of Christ in 2009, the Washington State Supreme Court added that the government burdens religious exercise if the coercive effect of an enactment operates against a party in the practice of his religion. Moving forward from the prevailing consent decree in Bellevue, of which the Church Council is a signatory, requires holding these values at the center of any proposed legislation. Communal self-organized tent encampments have been hosted and sponsored by a variety of congregations on the east side since 2005. Health officials, law enforcement, members of congregations, volunteers, and residents of the encampments have spoken in cities throughout the east side about the healthful impact and healing impact of this religious exercise of service, with the promise for more permanent stability in their lives being extended. I have worked with at least 7 self-organized encampments in cities throughout the region over the years, and I've facilitated numerous public meetings in at least 7 different cities, and have heard testimony after testimony of the difference these communities have made in their lives. I ask you to discern carefully and reconsider your actions and this land use code and ordinance in light of unnecessary and burdensome restrictions that will limit and potentially thwart faith communities from exercising their religious duty on their property. Such restrictions are not in keeping with the common good, which includes upholding the dignity of housed and unhoused residents in Bellevue and the East Side equally and equitably. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
The final 3 speakers in order are Joel Jackman, Brian Schuster, and Arnie Goldstein.
Good evening, and thank you for your time. I'm Joel Jackman. I live at 122 157th Avenue Northeast in Bellevue. I've been there for 43 years. And Temple B'nai Torah and the encampment that comes there is about 70 feet behind my fence. So I'm a very close neighbor. It's been mentioned that this homelessness is a difficult problem nationwide. It really is. And people are looking for solutions, and I think, what does it mean to be success? Tonight I want to talk about success, and I think I want to talk about accountability. You know, the city reports that the encampments have been successful. From my point of view as a neighbor, it's hard for me sometimes to buy that claim. I think that ignores some of our own experience, evidenced by the police reports that were mentioned earlier. Although it was mentioned that I think the word success tonight was used in terms of there is no disease in the camps, something to that effect. There have been some problems. And I think we should talk about what it means to be successful. And I realize that this is a big problem nationwide as to how do you define success, but I think accountability has a lot to do with it. I was glad to see these 2 last items, safety and security reports and periodic operation reports. on this list here. If I have time at the end, I'd like to ask kind of what is involved in that. I think for most of us, success is judged not just by the outcome, but how we do our jobs. The city staff has rules to follow when they're coming on developing a new ordinance. If they ignore the code's rules and such that they have to deal with, is that success? I think success should be measured by the degree to which an agreed plan is carried out in practice. And I think that's what some of the people are trying to do in asking for more accountability from the plans that are being worked on. And I think that that is something that's going to be very important, because when a plan is stated as it's going to happen, such as when a encampment comes in and then it's not followed, it's denied, that there's been any problems, it really affects credibility and trust. And I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Jackman.
So.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name is Brian Schuster. I live at 12436 Southeast 27th Street, and I am nearly a lifelong member of the city of Bellevue, except for some very early years when my dad had us living elsewhere. I've been involved in this process involving homeless encampments, I think, as long as Mr. Chelmniak and Mr. Lee, and certainly Ms. Pratt. I had the honor and privilege of co-chairing the logistics committee for Tent City 4 for Temple B'nai Torah in 2005, and signed the application for the first homeless encampment permit under the LUCA. In that capacity, I had the opportunity to work with and learn from the members of Tent City 4. They're just like we are. They've had some hard times, but the people are good people. They're honest people. They're hardworking people, but they fell on bad times. I never hesitated at any time to have any of my children, whether they be of whatever age and whatever gender, help out in the camp, go through the camps, meet with the residents of the camps. Again, they're just like we are. They just fell on hard times. I appreciate all the efforts that this council has been doing to address homelessness in the city of Bellevue, with the work towards the permanent shelter and the work on keeping the temporary shelter open year-round. I hope I got that correct. I applaud you, and I know you want to do what's right, and you want to enable faith communities to be able to fulfill their mission of social justice and helping the homelessness problem through tent cities, which isn't a perfect solution. We all know that, but it is part of the solution. And it is something that these people who live in these tent cities need. It brings them community. I saw people who, young women who, when I first saw them, I was like, wow, if it weren't for tent cities and the community of those tent cities, where would they be? Again, I just want to thank you for all your work. I know you're going to do what's right to help the faith communities and fulfill the social justice commitments and obligations that we have, and streamline the process so that it'll be even easier for us to fulfill our missions. Thank you.
Thank you.
The final speaker signed up this evening is Arnie Goldstein.
Hi, my name is Arnie Goldstein. I am a 40-year member, resident of Bellevue. I live at 2146, my first resident was on 156th, where we lived for years, and for the last 30 years, we've been at 4531 146th Avenue Southeast. I retired several years ago and became a vegetable gardener after a life of traveling. We produce food for the hungry, and I volunteer for Tent City 4, where we provide dinners and other help. I volunteer for the Bellevue Urban Garden down in the Greenbelt, where we provide thousands of pounds of food to HopeLink, where I also volunteer to help them with their gardens. Everything that we grow is donated. We've hosted a number of times, and I became familiar with the residents there, and I agree with Brian. The folks that I've met have been folks just like you and just like me. I'm reminded of the story of a couple of folks at one of our encampments who met each other and got married and graduated into subsidized housing and went on to have a child. And if we can do more of that, that's wonderful. To our neighbors who might have been impacted by some of the encampments that have happened, we care as much about them as we do about the homeless. And we would like to do what we can to help people. I would like to do what we can to help people, and I would like the city of Bellevue to do the same. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That concludes the people who have signed up. Is there any other individual who did not sign up who wishes to speak tonight? Seeing none, I'd ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to close the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries to close the public hearing. I just want to qualify one thing. We are still taking information. If people want to email us, they can still do that. The record itself is not completely closed. I'm trying to qualify that.
The public hearing, the formal closure was 5 p.m. This afternoon, but we can still take comment if people spoke today, and they can submit those to the clerk's office.
I'm puzzled. I thought we continued to take, well, the council certainly continues to take anything that's sent to them as under consideration.
Discussion.
But with other land use code, I don't remember having a cutoff for other land use code amendments.
My understanding is that the 5 p.m. this afternoon requirement was specifically related to the public hearing comment period. The other methods of public comment are still available, and there will continue to be a public process, including potentially the study session next Monday, November 25th, with the council.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to clarify that it doesn't mean that council will not consider anything that that comes in. We've always done that.
We will continue to receive input from the public. Thank you.
So what is the schedule going forward? We're going to have a study session next week.
There will be, we have a placeholder for a study session on November 25th, and we have final action scheduled for November 9th.
Oh,
December.
for December 9th. Okay. I do want to make sure that we do this in a way that is as transparent as is possible. We are working toward getting this done this year because the consent decree is going to expire. That would put us back to the ordinances that exists, as I understand it, that the consent decree essentially modified. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so like we did with the land use code on the homeless shelter, I would like to have some way that if there are amendments that are going to be considered, that we can get those amendments to the proposal, I guess is what we would be doing. So I'd like to figure out a way that we can begin to signal and get those out to the public, at least, and even if we just are able to come up with some ideas for that at the next study session, I'd like to make sure that those amendments are written and included in the packet for the December 9 meeting.
Excuse me.
Are there,
Mr. Mayor.
yeah.
Just for public, for whatever, clarification, the timeline is not set in stone, because we've heard Mr. Michael Rommel, he actually, if I recall, during the last meeting just now, requested perhaps some more community engagement. Whether we do or not, because it's up to us, but I just want to be clear. There's no magic formula that says we have to make the decision, except for the consent decree. Yeah, that's right. But that's
The consent decree is a driver on this. If that were extended 6 months, that would change things. I would have no problem with that.
That's no problem.
But
just
so I think that there is that. Mr. Stokes.
Yeah, I have a concern with any rule that says comments or suggested changes must be submitted by a certain time. I think any council member has the right to, at any moment, propose something different as things come up. So I found that a little bit of a flaw in the last time we went around on this. And I understand the desire to have this put out as soon as possible, but that just cuts off any real deliberation up to the moment of making a decision.
So, and we are at this moment looking toward a decision date of December 9. It does not have to be that date. That is the last day that this council meets. It's the last day that I'm here as a council member. I guess what I'm trying to find out is there among the council, is there some thought? We've had this before us a few times. I definitely have some thoughts about amendments. If I'm the only one thinking about them, then I'll forget it. But
I'm thinking about it.
Okay. So do we want to say and work with staff on where we might have concerns about amendments? Because I'd like to have a process at which we see them.
Yes.
So who can say, just in general, I don't need the exact wording, but where are the areas that you might think we might want to look, where council members might want to suggest the council take a vote on changing an element of what's been proposed? Councilmember Robertson.
Sure, I'll go ahead and launch in. First, thank you everyone for coming tonight and weighing in and staying late at our council meeting and being part of the solution. I would like to have a discussion during the study session about the duration of stay. We have seen information from staff on some cities and some from the public on other cities that the duration regionally is really closer to 90 days. That's what was in the consent decree. I would like to have that discussion, the idea of going to 90 days consistent with the consent decree at our study session. Secondly, I was looking at the ordinance and it requires the sharing as part of the application of what insurance limits are available, but it doesn't have a standard. And so I don't know what is typical for this type of permit, whether most cities do require a certain level of insurance. But I'd like to have that information. I'm not suggesting a change at this time, but I'd like to have a discussion about that aspect of the application and how it relates to the consent decree and our LUPA. I believe the case, we had two public comments cite a case in 2009. One said it was City of Bellevue.
It's not.
I don't believe that's true. I think it's City of Woodinville versus North Shore United Church of Christ, which did not weigh in on our LUPA, and it specifically said that there's a balancing when the type of religious practice affects others outside the walls of the sanctuary. So I'm happy to send that link out to my colleagues. I sent it to the one other lawyer on the council. But if we need to have some information on that, it would be good to have that maybe as a privileged memo from the city attorney's office. That's what I am thinking at this point. I guess one other question would be if there's another way to make sure that we mitigate any criminality. We received on our desk tonight a history of criminal impacts on other tent city stays. So I don't know that we can, but I would like to know what is the limit of what we can do to make sure that when people are bringing new residents into a neighborhood for a temporary stay, that they are good neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others? John?
Well, I think there's been some interesting, I turned the wrong way. There have been some interesting legal questions raised, and I'd like to have some more discussion of that on both ends of it. My preference is, and I think our obligation and what Bellevue has been pushing for and understanding, if we don't want to be like Seattle, we don't want to be like other areas, we want to take a very aggressive and forward-looking approach towards finding shelter for homeless. And I would like to have an approach that's not a reactive, well, let's see what the least we can do is what the most we can do, and at the same time provide safety. And I believe we can do both of those. It's not either or choice. And we're going down that path, and if we don't go down that path, I think we've got more problems than we have now. And the issues that are brought up in the past are, one, they're the past, but you can learn from them. And I think those are things we look at, but it's not a reason to deny it or limit it to a small time period. And when we have organizations, particularly with the protections or the overall arching thing of the religious freedom, I find it interesting that we want to be conservative on that and push back to that. And I think we should look at that and find ways to make that work and utilize people who are actively trying to resolve this issue that we've been wrestling with for a long time. And I think we can do it in a way that makes the neighborhood better, protects the neighborhood. And so that's what I want to look at. What are the legal ramifications on both sides of it, and what can we do to maximize the effect of organizations who want to help people who are helpless?
Okay, so we're not, and I apologize, I'm really trying to get to the concept of, do you want to offer an amendment? And I think Councilmember Robertson gave us some specifics. I would like to offer an amendment I would like to talk about an amendment that I would like to offer. So I'm not looking for speeches.
Well, that's what I'm talking about offering. I have a right to.
So where is the area, then where would?
I said I want to find out about, I want to explore this, and then I would have.
Excellent.
This is not the place to make an absolute, you've got to do X or you can't speak. And that's not, I'm not saying you're suggesting that, but that seems to be what I'm hearing.
Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I kind of would like to talk about the length of stay and also the gap. We've heard both sides, many sides actually talking about the reason why we need to look at this carefully with, especially, the speakers talk about the compassion, all that stuff. I think this is all legitimate. So I just want to make sure that we have some kind of recommendation that can bring the two sides closer to what we hear tonight. The police maybe safety, really safety plus the religious freedom. I think those are the two things. I think we need to address the neighborhood's concern. There's some we've already addressed them, but there's some additional information that we receive of specific cases where there has been records of criminal activities. And on the other hand, we also have heard that there are religious grounds that we need to maybe look at, maybe even no restrictions to how the host can decide how long the tent can remain and all that. So there's just some conversation.
So I've heard
Thank you.
2 on length of stay,
Yes.
1 on insurance, 1 perhaps on the gap.
Yes.
As in terms of specifics, and then other possibilities. Is there anybody else who wants to? Yes, Councilmember Zahn, followed by Councilmember Newenhouse.
Well, I think when I look at this, the definition of success, or at least having some, I mean, I'm looking at this code, and maybe we don't normally have this in a land use code, but some preamble or some piece that talks about what we're actually trying to accomplish in this code, because it seems like it launches right into it. And since we're talking about, seems to me we're talking about how we really balance the exercise of the right to religious exercise and our furthering our governmental interest of our neighborhoods, that I would like to have something in the beginning that at least talks a bit about what that means to us as we're crafting this code. Because otherwise, when you pick it up, it launches right in, and it seems like it's missing the context. And I think perhaps if we have that, then these other pieces that we're going to talk about in terms of the amount of the gap and the duration will get worked through. And then on the accountability piece, it seems to me, again, there is a win-win here, that we want success both from the folks that are going to be sheltered, as well as the neighborhood that we want to make sure we have the safety. So anyway, I just think there's some work
Good
there.
question on a preamble to an adopted ordinance. This is would we have that in an adopted ordinance that would kind of state the reasons that we're doing this, other than the federal consent decree is expiring?
We certainly will have recitals in the adopted ordinance. At this point, staff has not received direction from council to prepare such ordinance for final adoption.
Well, it seems like maybe that is the place where we can then establish what we were thinking about that gets us to the land use code.
Mr. Newenhouse?
Thanks, Mayor. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming down tonight. Really appreciate everybody's input into this important issue and being a part of the solution here in Bellevue. Unfortunately, what I didn't hear enough tonight, and I would like to do some additional research and reading, would like to hear from staff on a couple of these issues as well, but I hear, on the length of stay, for example, we're hearing about, this is the standard, 120 days, well, 90 days, but I'm not hearing about what's best, what works. I'm hearing about standards in different cities, but I'm not hearing about what's the most effective length of time. So that's something I'd like to take a look at versus looking at other cities. What's going to be most effective for Bellevue? And then another area I'd like to get some more data and information, and we're provided with some of it tonight regarding some of these crime reports. I believe Ms. Call has said numerous times that 4 out of the 5 tent encampments were successful, but clearly we've received emails and are hearing from some residents tonight that that wasn't necessarily always the case. But there's varying degrees of what that activity was, but certainly some of the police reports that we saw here tonight are a little bit concerning, especially like the gentleman who was only 70 feet or 70 yards from a tent encampment. Obviously, folks like that are going to be feeling the impact of this the most. So clearly no amendments tonight, Mayor, but certainly some areas I'd like to study more before our study session next week.
Okay, so on the public safety issue, for me, it is really, it's this issue of the sort of permanently issued permit. I come at this as this is a temporary use. And most of what we have in terms of temporary uses in the code is 90 days. So as we get to that, but there have been some that have gone to 120 days. This is, and it's exactly, and I thank Councilmember Robertson for bringing it up. The North Shore case is very specifically about the balance. And that is a difficult thing for us to do. It's very difficult to do that balance. But you will probably see something coming from me regarding if you do it once and you don't get your permit revoked. I'm going back. 13 years ago, I said, we'll never revoke a permit. And that's true. We're just, if the permit gets issued, we're never going to revoke it as a city because of the way that will look. I mean, you would have to have, something of some utter catastrophe to revoke the permit. So that if there is going to be something like that, revocation of the permit cannot be the sole deciding factor. And I have no problem in trying to speed us up to a 90-day permit process, but I think every time you do it, you ought to go through the process. And I do fear that having this sped up process will then put a lot of pressure on a congregation to hold a tent city, whether or not they are really prepared to be able to hold it. So that's kind of the areas where I would look on this. Council members should work with staff if we have the opportunity to do that this week, so we have a little better idea of where we are or on that. We can give some direction at the November 25th meeting. And you know what? If we can't get this done December 9th, 6 of you are going to be here going into the new year. So, yes, Councilmember Robertson.
We need to get this done December 9th, because if we don't, it won't get to EBCC in time to take action before the consent decree expires. So if we need to go long on the 9th, if we need to have a study session on this on the 2nd of December, God forbid we should have to have a third meeting in December. We have to get this done before the end of the year. I'm absolutely committed to that.
Well, I have been committed to getting it done as well.
wasn't
However,
saying you
can I
weren't,
just
yeah.
point something out? With Sophia Way at Temple B'nai Torah, and that being the most likely place where you would have something, a encampment occur. It's outside of the EBCC. And by the way, I want to thank the temple for doing what they've done with Sophia Way. There was some confusion when I first saw from the public, but understanding that what you're doing is you have the women, they're inside, they're being taken care of. I just want to thank you for stepping up to that. It's a great example of how our faith communities have worked very successfully with the city. So I'll leave it at that, but I meant to bring that up earlier. So, Mr. Cantor, thank you, and to the congregates at the temple for doing that. I very much appreciate you. Any other, anything else on that? Okay, so try to work with staff, see if you can come up with some concepts around that. I just want to make sure that this is done in as transparent a manner as is possible. Is there any, I think that's the end of the agenda for tonight. It is. Is there any other business to come before the council tonight? Seeing none, we're adjourned.